Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if neglected Naruto the legendary Shinigami part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. Naruto sat in his room glaring out the window into the training field out back of his family's house. The curtains were mostly closed and the lights were off. The room itself was mostly bare, almost clinically so. The only things present in the room was a bed, desk and dresser. More so, everything inside it was white, and it looked to have been cleaned so obsessively that there wasn't even a speck of dirt. Looking around, he couldn't help but frown as he looked around. He hated the color white. It was too bright and clean, like everything else in his life. Naruto was one of 3 children, triplets in fact. Turning back to the window, he once again looked out, watching as his sisters trained. Mito continually hit and kicked a training dummy, their father Minato watching on from the sidelines, occasionally calling out pointers to her or words of encouragement. He could see the pattern of her moves, could almost hear the beat her hits were making as they hit the training dummy. On the other side of the family training ground, he could see his other sister Urza. She, unlike Mito, was moving through a number of swordsmanship stances, wielding a wooden sword in her right hand. Kushina, like Minato, was stood on the sideline, smiling as she directed her training, teaching her different stances as she did so. Both of his sisters looked like mini versions of their mother with the same long red hair and light purple eyes, but unlike Kushina, they had 3 whisker marks on each cheek. Mito was dressed in a baggy white shirt, red shinobi trousers. To finish this off her outfit, she had white bandages wrapped around her hands and wrists. Urza, on the other hand, had taken a recent liking to wearing armor, with a blue shirt beneath her armor and heavy metal boots as opposed to traditional shinobi sandals. But while they both looked like mini versions of Kushina, the resemblance was nothing compared to how much they looked like each other. The only way to tell them apart was their clothes, and sometimes their hairstyles. There was a reason why Naruto was sat sulking in his room whilst his sisters were outside being trained by their parents Minato and Kushina. The reason for this separation began almost 9 years ago. On the night he and his sisters were born, the Kyuubi, the 9-tailed demon fox, had been forcibly extracted from his mother, who had been left weak from giving birth to both Naruto and his 2 sisters. Luckily, Minato had been prepared and been able to reseal it before it could do any real damage to the village. He had also been able to seal just enough of the chakra in the air into his wife in order to keep Kushina alive, despite having had the Kyuubi removed from her. When it came down to sealing the Kyuubi again, Minato wasn't able to seal it back into his wife, as in her weakened state it would kill her. Instead, he had to seal it in his own children, who due to their Uzumaki heritage were the only ones who could safely contain the beast. The fox was therefore split in half, with the Kyuubi's yin chakra being sealed into Mito, and its yang chakra being sealed into Urza. His sisters were chosen as they were healthier and stronger than Naruto, who was born the smallest of the triplets, the run of the litter so to say. Because of this, both his sisters needed training from a young age in order to control the demonic chakra that was contained inside their bodies, along with the violent reaction that came with it. Naruto had seen them lose control once from his window, and both had been little more than wild animals until his parents slapped a seal on them to put them down and help them regain control. Unfortunately, though Naruto had not had a part of the Kyuubi sealed into him that night, he had not been left unaffected from that hellish night, though unlike his sisters he didn't get a power boost from the effects of that night. According to the doctors, the Kyuubi's chakra had affected both Naruto and his sisters' bodies while in their mother's womb. Mito and Urza weren't affected by it because they had the Kyuubi sealed inside them, their bodies having its chakra to fight the effects. Something Naruto did not have. They didn't even have a name for what Naruto had, and he really hoped they didn't name it after him. The problem Naruto's body had supposedly developed from exposure to the Kyuubi's chakra at such a young age was that it only converted around 20% of the food he ate into nutrients, making it so that no matter how much he ate, he was always starving. His body was painfully thin and weak, and because of that, Naruto tended to be constantly fatigued and tire very quickly. The doctors had actually expected him to have died before he reached the age of 2, and were shocked when he passed what they called the danger age. While they claimed he would never be completely healthy, they also said that he wasn't going to just keel over and die without warning. However, despite having got past the danger age, that still didn't stop his family from treating him like glass, like a strong wind would make him break. This had led to his parents developing an overprotectiveness when dealing with Naruto, something his sisters had also picked up. Therefore, while his sisters were being trained by his parents to be ninja, Naruto was forced to simply watch, and if he even looked like he might ask for training, they would give him this look, like the mere idea of him training terrified them. They always said they would train him when he was older and healthier, that they needed to focus on his sisters because of the fox, but Naruto knew they were just trying to placate him. They never intended to train him, at least not unless he gave them no choice. Instead, they probably wanted him to remain a civilian and stay safe behind the walls of Konoha for the rest of his life. Unlike Mito and Urza who took after their mother, Naruto took more after their father Minato. In fact, in the same way his sisters looked like their mother, Naruto was a near exact copy of his father. He had the same golden blonde hair with random spikes sticking up in every direction, and the same blue eyes. At least he would have been if he wasn't so thin and pale. His skin was so pale it had an almost gray tinge to it, and was wrapped so tight around his body you could see the bones. His eyes also seemed dimmer than his father's, almost lifeless in fact. Like his sisters, Naruto had 3 whisker-like birthmarks on his cheeks. Those said cheeks were sunken in. There were also dark rings around his eyes, making it look like he constantly had a pair of black eyes. Despite the fact that his room was white, Naruto's clothes were quite dark, making his skinny, unhealthy figure stand out even more. He wore a pair of black shinobi trousers, a gray t-shirt that despite being so small was still baggy on Naruto's body, and over the top he had a thick black hoodie with the hood pulled up to cover his hair. This was mostly so that his skin was covered, leaving only his face and hands uncovered, as no matter where he went he always felt cold. With a small grunt, Naruto turned away from the window and closed the curtain fully and plunging the room into complete darkness. Yet despite this, Naruto could still see perfectly as if the room was full of light. Naruto always hated bright light, it hurt his eyes and burned his skin. He much preferred the dark, where he could see even if other people couldn't. Moving to his bed, Naruto quickly got on his knees and reached under it, pulling out a scroll a moment later with a sigh. It was a scroll he had taken from his father's library, a very important scroll even if the information it held wasn't considered hard to find. The scroll contained the method to unlock a person's chakra system, giving them access to the energy running through their body. If his family knew he had this, they would undoubtedly take it from him. His father thought he was too weak to try and unlock his chakra, and didn't want Naruto to even try for fear of him getting hurt. His mother would be more than happy to never even let him leave the house again, and if she had her way Naruto would be forced to walk around in a bubble. Mito and Urza were no better than their parents, and despite them being the same age treated him more like a little brother. Naruto had been studying the scroll for the last week, making sure he understood everything. He didn't dare try and unlock his chakra in the house while his family was around through. His mother was a sensory type after all and would be able to feel him unlock it if she was nearby. That was why he had been waiting for today, or more precisely tonight, to finally go through with it. Tonight his parents would be out of the house, leaving only his sisters for Naruto to get past. While Mito was starting to show signs of being a sensory type like their mother, she was inexperienced, and wouldn't be able to tell if he wasn't in the house. She would however feel it if he unlocked his chakra, which meant he would need to get out the house without them knowing. Naruto found his right hand moving to his pocket, absently palming the kunai inside it that he had stolen from his sister Urza's room. He would unlock his chakra and finally prove to his family that he wasn't as weak as they all believed and that he could actually be a ninja, just like them. That night, it had been easier than usual to sneak out of the house, not that Naruto was complaining. Both Mito and Urza had been busy reading some scrolls that their mother had given to them, and they had been so invested in their scrolls that they didn't even notice him sneak past. Ironic that the son they thought was incapable of being a shinobi could sneak past his already in-training sisters. As soon as he was out of the door, Naruto sprinted to the fence at the back of the training ground, aiming for one specific part of the fence behind a bush. By the time he reached it, Naruto was panting, his pallid skin flushed red from his brief attempt at sprinting, so much so that he had to lean on his knees for support. It was times like this he really hated his body. Quickly moving behind the bush so he was out of sight of the house, Naruto took a moment to get his breath back before glancing back to make sure no one had seen him. When he was sure no one had seen him, Naruto turned his attention instead to the fence, pushing on the bottom of a particular plant and smirking when it moved. Quickly squeezing through, Naruto paused just long enough to make sure it closed behind him before running off into the forest that took up the space behind his family's home, the shadows between the trees soon covering him as he disappeared from sight. For the next half hour, Naruto slowly made his way further away from his home and deeper into the forest, only stopping when he found a small clearing and could no longer hear the sound of the village behind him. Licking his dry lips, Naruto sat himself down in the middle of the clearing on a rock with a flat surface, taking the scroll out and unrolling it as he did so. Naruto was about to start reading when he heard a noise coming from one of the trees around the edge of the clearing, and faster than his weak body should have been able to, he pulled the kunai out of his pocket and threw it towards the place where sound was coming from with deadly aim. He had spent hours learning to throw that kunai while his parents were training his sisters, and it seemed to finally be paying off. He watched as what looked like a hawk fell out of the tree, the kunai having hit it right in the center of its chest. As he walked over to retrieve his blade, Naruto also noted with dull curiosity that its left wing had broken when it hit the ground, but didn't think any more about it as he wrenched his kunai out and wiped the blood off on the grass. Looking at the broken body of the hawk at his feet, Naruto couldn't hide his curiosity. Having lived such a sheltered life, he had never actually seen a body before. It therefore took a great amount of effort for him to tear his attention away from the sight before him. Finally returning to his previous position on the rock, Naruto turning his attention back to the scroll and slowly started to form the hand seal it said was needed to focus his unlocked chakra. Closing his eyes, Naruto turned all his focus inwards, looking for the streams of chakra as the scroll called them running through his body like water. He started by feeling around his stomach for the swirling pool of chakra, where all the small streams were supposed to run to and from. It was supposed to be the easiest part of his body to find because it was also the biggest, followed by the head and then the heart. Slowing his breathing as he went deeper and deeper into himself, the world outside slowly started to fade away from his senses and Naruto found himself in a world of darkness. It was cold and dark, nothing around him, and Naruto was starting to worry when it didn't change. This was supposed to be where his chakra was stored. The scroll said it should have been a blue light flowing like water in the darkness. Panic starting to set in, Naruto's mental image started to turn in every direction as his breathing picked up, looking around desperately for any sign of light until finally he stopped and just seemed to shrink into himself. His family was right, he was too weak to be a ninja. He couldn't even find his chakra, or worse yet, he had so little it was invisible to him. Naruto was ready to give up completely at that moment and was about to leave, when something in the dark suddenly grabbed his wrist. It felt like a hand, but it was hard as stone and as cold as ice. He could almost feel the bruise forming under its grip as it started trying to pull him even deeper into the darkness. Eyes widening in fear, Naruto tried to pull away from whatever it was that was holding him, the darkness hiding it from him. But it was too strong, its grip unyielding as it pulled him down. This was impossible. He was in his mind. Nothing else should be in his mind. Naruto wanted to scream, but when he opened his mouth, no sound came out. Finally the thing let go of his wrist, Naruto quickly hugging it to his body as he tried in vain to see what had been holding it. He turned in every direction, unsure of what was up or down at his moment as his eyes shot about looking for any more movement in the darkness. However, instead of movement, Naruto's eyes found something else. Something that made his heart skip a beat and tears form in the corners of his eyes. Light. Not blue like the scroll had said it would be, but a dark purple ball of light surrounded by what seemed like red lightning. It almost reminded Naruto of an egg, but as he got closer it got larger and larger. By the time he was only a few feet from it, the egg looked to be the size of the Hokage Tower. As he slowly reached a hand towards the crackling red outline, Naruto noticed that his hand and arm were bleached of color, like the negative of a picture. All thoughts of whatever it had been that brought him here were gone from Naruto's mind. All his focus was on the light as his hands slowly inched towards it. He let out a slight gasp as his palm hit the light, and it turned out to be solid, with the texture of ice-cold glass. Naruto pushed against it slightly and was surprised to find that while it still felt as solid as glass, it gave slightly under the pressure of his hand, almost like it was rubber. Pushing a little more, Naruto soon found the limit and frowned before trying to use both hands. It gave a little more until there was an indent about as deep as his elbows, before it pushed back and Naruto was thrown away slightly. He tried again, only to be pushed back again as a deep frown grew on his lips and he started pounding against the light with very little success. Your knife, use your kunai. Spinning around in fear, Naruto strained his eyes looking out into the darkness, trying to find what had spoken. The voice had sounded odd, like dry leaves in the wind, and had sent a shiver down his spine. But no matter how hard he looked, there was nothing, no movement, just darkness stretching out as far as his eyes could see. Slowly turning back to the egg, Naruto reached into his pocket and pulled out the kunai. How he still had it when he was in his mind Naruto didn't know, but at the moment he really didn't care. Licking his lips, Naruto pushed the tip into the surface of the egg, feeling as it resisted slightly before cutting through. Smiling as he started using the kunai to cut a line through the light until it was almost as tall as him, before quickly putting the kunai back in his pocket. Not giving himself time to overthink what he was out to do, Naruto pushed himself through the hole he had just made in the egg and plunged headfirst into the light. For a moment Naruto was overcome with a feeling of absolute peace. Warmth flooded his body and for the first time it didn't make him uncomfortable. All the aches in his body he had grown used to for as long as he could remember were being soothed away, all pain and sadness gone. Only to be replaced by new pain. It hit like a hammer, slamming into his body and knocking the wind out of him. Burning, he was burning from the inside. He could feel as the fire burned its way through something, like veins inside his body that he had never known about and didn't carry blood. His mouth opened in a silent scream as his fingers dug into his body trying to get the fire out. Naruto was burning for a few seconds before finally his mind could take no more, and he simply blacked out. When Naruto woke up, he knew he was back in his body in the real world, mostly because of the feel of the cold stone under him. He pulled in deep, wheezing breaths as he used his hands to push himself up into a sitting position. His body ached more than he could ever remember it doing, and although the fire was no longer raging through him, he could still feeling something moving around in its place. When he finally opened his eyes, the world was spinning, or maybe it was just his head. He couldn't think very clearly yet. The memory of the pain running through his now numb body was clouding his thoughts. Yet at the same time he was aware of everything around him, the sweat dripping off his skin and hitting the rock underneath him. The wind pushing its way through the trees and their leaves, whistling as it passed his ears. He could feel every living thing in the forest around him. He could feel the birds in the trees, the deer moving as a group not 100 meters from where he was. Naruto could feel every insect in the grass and under the ground. He knew the exact number of every ant in 3 different colonies in the clearing around him, and could feel as they worked tirelessly. A beehive hanging on a tree to his right, thousands of bees flying in and out in a constant stream. It was all just so much. Slowly Naruto started to calm down, pull himself together to the point that he could think somewhat clearly again. If he stayed out too long, one of his sisters might decide to check on him, and if they found out that he wasn't there, they would go straight to their parents, who would probably form a whole search party to find him. That was the last thing he needed. Slowly getting to his feet on legs that felt like water under his weight, Naruto was about to start making his way home when he noticed something odd. There was a smell in the air, a delicious one at that. Looking around, he tried to find the source of the scent, his mouth beginning to water slightly. Finding the source, his eyes locked onto the dead body of the hawk he had killed earlier. As his eyes locked onto the corpse, he found himself slowly approaching the bird. At first he had trouble focusing on it, his eyes blurring slightly, but the more he tried to see it clearly, the clearer it became. He could see a faint outline shimmering around the corpse of the bird. The outline was in blue, and somehow he knew that meant it was dead. Even as he watched, an orb of light begin to force itself out of the body of the hawk, the orb of light slowly beginning to hover above the corpse. Unknown to Naruto was the fact that his eyes were adjusting to the point they could see the life in things. His irises had turned a crimson-red color, and his sclera had turned a dark black color. When added to his usually thin and pale appearance, it gave him a distinctly unnerving look. For about a minute Naruto had just stared at the ball, transfixed by the pale light it gave off, even as it shined in his eyes, unaware of the changes he had begun to undertake, or even that he had been slowly walking towards it. Then Naruto was suddenly struck with a craving, his mouth dry as he licked his lips. He didn't know what this thing was, if it was dangerous or some kind of jutsu he had never heard of, but there was one thing he did know. The pale blue egg made out of light was the most delicious thing he had ever seen, and he wanted nothing more than to eat it whole. Slowly reaching out towards it, Naruto wrapped his hands around the orb and pulled it towards him. As he brought it closer to him, he began to giggle in delirious happiness. Bringing it up, Naruto opened his mouth as wide as he could, not realizing his mouth had opened to twice what should have been possible, and shoved the egg in. For a moment Naruto feared he was going to choke as he tried to swallow the orb of light. The orb, however, seemed to get stuck in his throat, but then he felt it moving, and when it passed his windpipe, the young blonde took in a deep breath. Then he felt it. The moment the orb hit his stomach, Naruto felt his chakra increase ever so slightly, a cold sensation spreading through his body as it seemed to dissipate inside him and add to his reserves. He felt as the new pathways he had just opened pulsed, and couldn't help the pleased sigh that escaped his throat. This was the first time in his life that Naruto's body didn't hurt. He had done it, he had unlocked his chakra. Now his family would finally see that he wasn't weak, and that they would have to train him just like his sisters. He could be a ninja just like his father and protect the village. Licking his lips, Naruto opened his eyes to reveal that they had returned to normal. Turning in the direction of his home, he started walking towards it, a slight skip in his step as he headed home. By the time he had gotten home, the adrenaline rush from activating his chakra had worn off, and the moment he reached his bed, Naruto collapsed onto it, and was asleep within moments of his head hitting the pillow. The next day Naruto was woken up by the sound of someone banging on his door and calling his name over and over again, and though it took a moment for his mind to fully wake up, he easily recognized the voice of his sister Urza and let out a groan. He didn't hate his sisters or anything, though they weren't as close as they had once been. When they were younger he did everything with them, hell, he would go to them if he had a nightmare in the night instead of his parents. But then they had started training and he was left out, and their parents refused to even consider letting him join them in the training. That had been about a year ago, and since then he had become distant from both Urza and Mito. Not that either of his sisters actually noticed. No, they were unsurprisingly too busy training to actually realize he was being left out of things. It wasn't fair that they were being trained while he was being treated like glass, and even though they tried to spend time with him, they were usually too busy with something to do with training. But that was going to change now that he had unlocked his chakra. I mean, now he had access to his chakra, he could train with them. Then there was the fact he wanted to ask his parents what that weird orb thing he had swallowed last night had been. Though he had to say that the fact that he had done something so stupid as to unlock his chakra like that by himself did actually scare him looking back at it. His back clicking as he got out of bed, still dressed in the clothes he had worn last night, Naruto moved to the door and opened it. He was a little surprised to see that not only was Urza standing on the other side but Mito was there as well, both of them smiling at him. Mito was the first to step forward and pull Naruto into a hug, though the blonde was annoyed when he noticed that she was being overly gentle with him, still treating him like he was made of glass. "Happy birthday, Naruto!" the two girls chorused as they smiled down at him. It took a moment for the words to sink into his head, though he did notice Urza taking Mito's place and hugging him as well. "Birthday?" Naruto asked, a frown of confusion on his face as he looked at the girls in front of him. Both girls frowned at him, Urza stepping back from the hug so she was once again next to Mito, placing her hands on her hips as she did so, doing it in a way Naruto had seen their mother do. "Really, Naruto, you should get out of your room more often if you don't even know it's our birthday," Urza said, a disapproving look on her face as she looked down at Naruto. "If I had a reason to leave my room more often, maybe I would," Naruto said somewhat uncomfortably as his eyes shifted between the two similar-looking girls. His comment was met with uncomfortable silence, both girls suddenly looking guilty. Maybe they weren't as clueless as Naruto had first thought, they at least realized what he was hinting at. But as quick as it came, the moment was gone and Mito was bouncing on the balls of her feet and grabbed his arm, pulling him out of his room and towards the stairs as she did so, a large smile on her face as she unceremoniously dragged him downstairs. "Come on, Naruto, get your arse into gear, Mom and Dad are waiting for us downstairs. Don't forget we still have to get everything ready for our party, everyone is coming," Mito said excitedly as she continued to pull Naruto after her, Urza running after them, a look of disapproval once again on her face as she saw how giddily Mito was acting. Naruto's face darkened slightly at the mention of the party, not that either of his sisters seemed to notice as he whispered under his breath. "You mean your party?" Naruto said bitterly. Throughout the day Naruto had tried to talk to either his mother or father with little successes, at least beyond them saying happy birthday. When they weren't telling him to eat to help keep his strength up, they were moving around the house setting up everything for when the clan heads and their children arrived for the party. Since they were young, the clan heirs and the Namikaze triplets had been forced to interact with each other, their parents trying to ensure they would all get along when they were older and running the village themselves. Naruto was sure the fact at least all of the main clans had children the same age was not a coincidence. However, out of all of the other clan heirs, the only one their age that Naruto ever actually got along with was Shikamaru, and even then, they only ever really played shogi together, and even then they did not play it that much. Shikamaru was currently winning their little competition at 24 wins to Naruto's 17, but according to the lazy boy, he was the only person outside his clan that had ever actually beaten him, so that was probably good. He did, however, get along well with Itachi, the oldest of the Uchiha children. While they didn't speak often, the few times they did, Naruto enjoyed his company, and the older teen was probably the only person that didn't treat him like he was completely made out of glass. His brother Sasuke, on the other hand, was a whiny little mummy's boy that followed his brother around like a shadow. Unfortunately, he was also one of Urza and Mito's friends, so he was around more often than not. Naruto was still trying to talk to either both or even one of his parents when the party started, and it was all but hopeless then because they were too busy talking and socializing with the other adults. Naruto just found a quiet corner of the room to sit in and watch as his family moved around the room, laughing and talking to everyone. No one seemed to even notice him other than Shikamaru sending him a nod with his usual bored expression on his face, though he thought he saw his sisters sending him odd looks out of the corner of their eyes. "Happy birthday, Naruto," a calm and stoic voice spoke out from behind Naruto. Slowly turning to look at the person that had walked over to him while he had his eyes closed, Naruto let a small smile cross his lips when he saw the ever-stoic Itachi moving over and taking the seat next to him. "Hey Itachi, thanks I guess," Naruto replied softly, his eyes still scanning the party going on around him. It was strange really, here he was sat in middle of a party that was being thrown for him, but yet he felt like a stranger. The two quiet boys sat in silence for a few minutes after that, both simply watching the other people in the room until the older teen finally decided to speak again. "I see you found that scroll I recommended. I can sense the chakra flowing through you now. It is odd though, as something about your chakra, It feels and looks odd, unnatural almost. Itachi said, a speculative look on his face as he looked at Naruto. Looking at the teen out of the corner of his eyes, Naruto wasn't surprised to see his eyes flashing red with his Sharingan as the older boy stared at him. It was true, Itachi had told him which scroll he needed to find to unlock his chakra, not that anyone other than the two of them knew this fact. While everyone else saw him as nothing but a weak, sick little boy, Itachi said he saw Naruto's potential and that he wanted to help ensure that he could actually reach said potential. He told Naruto what scrolls to read, recommended different training methods that he would be able to do until his body was stronger, and even showed him the proper way to throw the kunai he stole. Making sure not to look like they were doing more than exchanging pleasantries after seeing his mother glancing in their direction, Naruto not answer verbally or immediately. Instead, he gave Itachi a small nod. I was able to sneak out last night and unlock it, though it wasn't exactly like the scroll said. It did push me in the right direction. Naruto finally replied to Itachi, an inquisitive look on his face as he once again tore his gaze away from the party, instead turning it onto Itachi. Good, Itachi said simply. It was then that Itachi reached into his pocket and pulled out a fist-sized scroll, placing it on the younger blonde's lap as he did so. Your birthday present. Your room looked a little bare the last time I saw it, and I thought you might like something to put on the wall, Itachi said, his voice as calm and toneless as usual. Raising an eyebrow at the teen's words, Naruto unrolled the scroll to see the kanji for the words underneath the underneath. It was a popular saying in Konoha to look underneath the underneath to find the truth, and was actually one of his own favorite sayings. There was a little string on the top so it could be hung up, and Naruto was sure Itachi had written it himself. However, it was what was on the back of the paper that really caught his attention. A small smirk crept onto his lips as he saw what was on it, before he forcibly pushed down his smile. On the back of the scroll there was a storage seal, small enough that it would go unnoticed unless you were looking for it, and set out so that it would be completely invisible when he hung it up. Naruto already knew that his real present was sealed inside it, most likely so his parent or sisters didn't find it and try and take it off him. That was probably why Itachi had asked about him unlocking his chakra. He wanted to make sure Naruto would be able to open it later when no one was watching. Thank you, I think you might be right and my room could do with a little personality, Naruto said, the smile once again coming to his face as he did so. The only response he received in reply was a nod from the older boy, before Itachi stood up silently and walked off without a word, not even looking back at Naruto as he did so. The next hour or so was mostly the same as the first one was for Naruto after Itachi left, though his sisters and a few of the other clan heirs had come over at one point or another to engage him in conversation. They did not stick around for long though. Naruto was not really that surprised. He did after all know that he made the others uncomfortable. They didn't know how to act around him and were often worried about offending his sisters or even his parents by saying the wrong thing. His usual sickly appearance had that effect on a lot of people, both kids his own age and the adults. He was the son of two powerful ninja, one of which was the Hokage himself, and with him being so weak and looking so sickly, it just didn't fit in with their idea of what a son of Minato Namikaze and Kushina Uzumaki should look like. Even his godfather Jiraiya acted weird around him, if not outside tried to ignore him. The pervert would spend most of the time during his visits either talking with his father and sisters, or perving on his mother only to get his arse kicked. Even now Naruto saw the man's face was swollen after probably getting a beating either from his mother or some other woman, who had no doubt punched him for making a comment about their bodies. It did not seem to affect him as he was still smiling and talking to people as if nothing was wrong, even as he started turning purple from the bruises that formed. Naruto was about ready to head up when the sound of a glass ringing reached his ears and he turned to see his dad in the middle of the room. His mum stood next to him with a large smile as everyone turned to look at them. Attention everyone, I have an announcement. Urza, Mito, could you come over here for a moment? Minato said, a large smile on his face as he gestured for his daughters to join him. Naruto watched with narrowed eyes as his sisters moved to stand in front of their dad, getting up from his seat and moving closer so he could see, as the crowd started to block his view. He went mostly unnoticed though, even as he watched his dad kneel down in front of his sisters while their mother continued to look on with a proud expression on her face. And when he saw it, Naruto felt a hollow feeling begin to form in his stomach. Now, after talking it over with your mom, and seeing how much work you have been putting into your training, we both agreed you are ready. So first thing tomorrow, I am going to start teaching you both the Rasengan. Happy birthday, girls. Minato said, a happy expression on his face as he saw the joy on his daughters' faces. The room soon burst into cheers as Mito and Urza both started grinning and ran over and hugged Minato, Kushina soon bending down and turning it into a group hug. Naruto felt the hollow in his stomach get worse, the feeling spreading in his heart beginning to beat faster and faster, the room beginning to spinning around him as it did so. He saw Itachi watching him while leaning against the wall to his left with his usual blank expression, his eyes flashing red for a moment, as if waiting to see what Naruto was going to do. When the room finally did stop spinning around, Naruto could only feel numbness for a moment, the feeling spreading throughout his whole body momentarily, only for it to be rapidly replaced by a cold rage. Naruto went to step forward only for someone to grab his arm and hold him in place, and he wasn't overly surprised to see it was Shikamaru. The usually lazy boy was giving him a worried look while his hand gripped his arm in an iron grip, shaking his head slightly as his eyes moved from Naruto to his family, as they pulled away from the hug. "It's not going to change anything, Naruto, just let it go," Shikamaru said, his tone serious as he continued to hold Naruto back. For a moment Naruto thought about listening to his friend's words, the rational part of his mind telling him Shikamaru was right and that kicking off right now in the middle of the party would not change a thing. But the other part of his mind, the part that was consumed by his anger, was louder. Jerking his arm from Shikamaru's grip, Naruto turned his glare on the boy and snarled slightly. However, what he didn't know was that as he glared, his scara started to bleed to black and his irises started to blaze a deadly crimson red. The young Nara's eyes widened in shock and he backed away in slight fear, but in the time it took him to blink, Naruto's eyes were back to normal, and he was moving towards his family. It wasn't until he was stood right in front of them that Kushina noticed him, by which point he had set his face into a blank expression. For a moment he saw her eyes widen at him, like she suddenly realized he was there before they moved to the others, then back to him. He saw the flash of guilt in her eyes, but it was only there for a moment before they seemed to harden with resolve. "Naruto dear," Kushina began, her voice quiet as she reached her hand out to him. Naruto, however, didn't give her the chance to make an excuse. "Are you going to lie to me again and claim the Rasengan as part of their training to help control the fox's chakra?" Naruto asked, his voice harsh, though not overly loud, as he was aware that he did not want to draw too much attention to what was happening. His words, though despite being spoken quietly, did manage to get around the room, those who were standing closest to the group turning so they could watch the ongoing drama. Not that it really bothered Naruto though, as he could see it was making both his mother, and now his father, uncomfortable, quite uncomfortably. "Naruto, please, we can talk about this later," Kushina said, her voice still quiet as she looked around her nervously. "No," Naruto said, his voice rising slightly as he did so. Now everyone's attention was on him, including his wide-eyed sisters. "You always say we'll talk later, or that you need to focus on Urza and Mito's training because of that bloody fox. I've had enough, or your lies. I've had enough, just tell me the truth. You were never going to train me, were you?" Naruto said, beyond caring, as he vented the anger he had been building up all these years. Silence, heavy and thick silence, settled throughout the whole room as Naruto's voice carried across the room. Naruto could see the adults sending each other looks, yet no one seemed surprised to hear his allegations against his parents. Finally, after what seemed like forever, Minato stepped forward, standing between Naruto and the rest of their family, and sending Naruto a sad look as he sighed. Naruto could also see Jiraiya moving to stand next to his father, his face stern but mostly blank. "You're right, Naruto, we never intended to train you. But you have to understand why. Understand that your condition makes it too dangerous. Your body is too dash." Minato began to say, crouching down slightly so he could talk to his son on his level. "Weak? That's what you think, isn't it, that I'm weak?" Naruto sat, his ire increasing as he gave into his childish fit of anger, which was not surprising really, as he was actually a child. The words seemed to hit his family like a physical blow, making his father Minato flinch while Kushina, Urza and Mito looked away from him. Finally it was Jiraiya who snapped, stepping forward and staring at Naruto with an impassive face that made the young blonde's body tense. "That's exactly why, kid, you are weak. Your body is not strong enough to go through the strain of shinobi training. You can barely carry yourself from day to day. It's time you saw the truth, Naruto. You will never be a ninja," Jiraiya said, tired of all beating around the bush. It was time someone told the boy the truth. It was the best thing for everyone involved. Naruto had started taking steps back the more Jiraiya spoke, his words ringing in his head over and over. The tears he had been holding for so long finally started to escape his eyes and stream down his face as people backed away from him, no one seeming to be able to look him in the eye as he ran from the room. With Kushina. For a moment Kushina could do nothing but stand frozen as her precious son Naruto ran out of the room. As she watched him leave, tears trailing down his face, she didn't know what she was supposed to do. For the last few years Jiraiya had been warning them about not being straight with Naruto, quite firm in the belief that giving him false hope was many times crueler than just being honest with him. But how were you supposed to tell your child that they would never be able to live their dream, and that he was through no fault of his own too weak to do what every other member of his family did? Despite everything that had happened with the Kyuubi, The day the triplets were born had been the best day of her life. It had been the day she had become a mother. Not even that damn fox getting loose could ruin that, no matter what other people might think. Unfortunately, though, her happiness couldn't last long. It had taken about a week for them to notice something was wrong with Naruto. He fed the same if not more than his sisters, yet despite his healthy appetite he didn't seem to gain any weight. His baby fat had been melting away more and more with each passing day, and his cries of discomfort never seemed to stop. It got so bad that they had to call in the doctors, and when the medical professionals did their tests, what they found broke both Minato's and her own hearts. 2 years, 3 if they were lucky. That was how long the doctors had given him to live, and even then that was only with her baby boy living in the hospital with an 4 hooked into his tiny arm, the feed constantly trying to give him the nutrients his own body just wasn't able to process. When he had been in the hospital, the both of them had visited him every day, Kushina practically moving into the hospital with the girls for those 3 years. If not for his duty, Minato would have been there with her, but they had made do with him making time to visit at least once a day. Kushina had watched every day as her baby seemed to wither away more and more, getting thinner and weaker every day that passed. He had been so small lying in that hospital bed, he had been fragile like glass. Yes, those first few years had definitely been hard. Then the day came that the doctors told her that despite all the odds, Naruto had lived past what the doctors had called his danger age. The worst was behind them, and even though he would never be completely healthy, she could actually take him home again for the first time in years. That should have been the start of something better. They were finally a real family again. But Mito and Urza needed training to help prepare them for dealing with the fox. Urza had shown straight away that she had the Uzumaki bloodline, one that Kushina also possessed, solid chakra, and over the years Urza had demonstrated an understanding and a skill in it that Kushina herself had never had. Kushina could use it to make her chains with a blade on the end, and had even learned how to use them to suppress the chakra of anyone or anything she had caught in them. But Urza had taken the skill one step further. Her little girls seemed to be able to make almost anything with them, including actual armor of all things. Then there was little Mito, her other daughter, who, while born without the Uzumaki bloodline, was slowly turning into a very adept sensory type shinobi. As where Urza found her passion in kenjutsu, Mito instead found hers in fuinjutsu. Like her father, she was fascinated by seals of all kinds, learning them, studying them, and taking them apart to see how they worked. That, coupled with her growing skill in taijutsu, told Kushina that she would be a very strong kunoichi one day. In fact, both her girls would. Naruto, though, sometimes there were days he couldn't walk down the stairs without getting winded. Just the thought him even holding a kunai terrified her, let alone actually training with one. But when he had seen his sisters training, he wanted to join them. Kushina had seen it in his face. Naruto wanted to be a ninja, her sickly little boy. Both Kushina and Minato knew that if he ever tried to unlock his chakra, his weak little body might just break from the strain, let alone try and use it. So they instead tried to buy themselves time, explaining how they couldn't train as instead they needed to focus on getting his sisters ready because of the fox. They just wanted to wait until he was older and more mature. Maybe then he would be able to understand that he just couldn't be a shinobi. But Jiraiya was right. Even though she was angry enough to kill him at the moment, Kushina knew he was right. Keeping on lying to Naruto like this was wrong, so maybe telling him the truth might be kinder in the long run. He had warned them from day one that to give Naruto false hope wasn't a kindness, and that he did not agree with what they were doing. He had even offered to try and help Naruto unlock his chakra, saying that it might actually help strengthen his body if it didn't kill him. But Kushina didn't want to take the risk, and had put her foot down. That was why Jiraiya had always kept his distance from Naruto. The man was unwilling to lie to him, but at the same time he knew it wasn't his place to go against the both of them, as they were his parents. Kushina also knew that if Naruto had ever asked him, the old pervert would have been more than happy to train him, and so he had tried to distance himself to avoid it. However, none of it changed anything right now, not after seeing her son running out of the room in tears with a heartbroken expression on his face. Turning a glare on the legendary shinobi, Kushina waited until she saw him flinch and look away in shame before running after her son. As she left, Kushina could hear Minato apologizing to the guests, before saying the party was over. With Naruto. By the time he had reached his room, Naruto's tears had given way to numbness, his face falling into an expressionless mask as he sat on his bed. His head was still ringing with Jiraiya's words, echoing over and over again. "You will never be a ninja, you will never be a ninja, you will never be a ninja." But the fact was, all it had done was validate everything Naruto had already known, that his family thought he was weak. That they had been lying to him for years, and that they never actually intended to train him like Mito and Urza, never. Squinting slightly as he felt his eyes burn, Naruto shook his head, thinking he was going to start crying again. not realizing that the pupils in his eyes kept bleeding out before receding again. Naruto found himself absent-mindedly palming the kunai that was still in his pocket, running a finger along the edge and making a mental note that it needed sharpening. He was actually about to take it out when he felt someone's chakra from downstairs break off from the rest and start up the stairs, the sound of their footsteps soon reaching his ears. If he had more experience, Naruto might have been able to tell how it was from chakra alone, but for now all he could do was tell that whoever they were, they had a lot of chakra. He didn't have to wait long, however, because a moment later there was a soft knock on the door before it was opened slightly, and the face of his mother could be seen through the opening. Naruto hadn't turned the light on when he had entered, making the light from the hallway cut through the darkness of his room only to end at his feet and leave the rest of his body in shadows. But while his face was hidden, Naruto could clearly see the concerned face of his mother, her eyes somehow finding his own in the dark even though she would be unable to actually see them. She made no move for the moment to enter his room, standing in the doorway and trying to squint as her hand reached for the light switch, only to let out a sigh when she did and nothing happened, Naruto having removed the light bulb several days ago. "Naruto dear, we need to talk about this," Kushina said softly as she saw the shadow-cloaked figure of her son sat on his bed in the dark room. Naruto didn't answer straight away, trying to get his voice under control so it didn't break and show even more weakness than she expected from him. "What exactly is there to talk about? You both have been lying to me for years. Constantly making promises you never intended to keep, giving me false hope. You think I'm too weak to even unlock my chakra, don't you?" Naruto said, his voice as hollow as his gaze as he finally looked his mother in the eyes. He watched as she flinched at each accusation as if they were physical blows, tears gathering in her eyes. But at this moment in time Naruto just couldn't bring himself to care. As much as he loved his family, they had lied to him, and that had truly hurt him. Seeming to give up on the light, Kushina walked into the room and sat on the bed next to him, and though she still couldn't see more than his outline, Naruto could still see her perfectly in the darkness. He could see her just as clearly as if it was day. "Naruto, we should have been straight with you when you first asked us for training. Both your father and I knew from the start that we shouldn't have promised to train you. I am so sorry, we never should have lied to you. But we just couldn't. We thought if we waited until you were older it would be easier to explain things then," Kushina said quietly as she sat next to her son. She made to rest her hand on his shoulder in comfort, but pulled back when he flinched away from her touch as if it were poison. Pulling her hand back, a crushed look on her face, she instead lay her hand in her lap and looked down. "You have to understand, Naruto, with your condition it is too dangerous for you to train. I spent hours talking about this with your father and even a few medic-nin. We even considered training you in genjutsu at first. But simply unlocking your chakra could kill you, your body is just not strong enough for the added strain." Naruto did understand, and though hearing that unlocking his chakra could have killed him, all her words did was make him angry. After all, hadn't he unlocked his chakra the day before? Sure, it had been painful at first, but nothing he couldn't handle. Clenching his hands on his knees as his eyes started burning again, Naruto somehow managed to ground out his words without resorting to shouting. "But you never even tried, never are. How do you know that it would kill me? Maybe it would help with my condition. Did you ever even consider that?" Naruto said in anger as glared at his mother, finally giving in to his anger. Another flinch, followed by a deep sigh. "We did, and everyone we talked to agreed that if unlocking your chakra didn't kill you, it might help your condition. But it wasn't a risk we were willing to take, not when it could cost you your life," Kushina said in a pained voice as she tried to explain such a difficult topic to her 10-year-old son. "Why was it your decision to make? If it's my life, it should be up to me, not you or anyone else. If you had just believed in me, I wouldn't have had to do." Naruto began, the anger not leaving him. If anything, it grew in him like a ball of molten rock. "No!" This time it was Naruto's turn to flinch. The hard expression suddenly appeared on his mother's face, stopping the words in his throat. "Naruto, no matter what you think of us at the moment, your father and I have every right to make that decision. If it's a choice between your life or your ability to use chakra, there is not, and there never will be a choice. You might not understand it right now, but we could never risk losing you, not again." This time when Kushina reached out to him, Naruto didn't move away, and was quickly pulled into a firm hug while she stroked the back of his head soothingly. They stayed like that for several minutes, neither saying anything as Naruto allowed himself to take comfort in the familiar embrace. When they finally did separate again, Naruto saw his mother had tears in her eyes, but that she also had a small smile on her lips. "It's getting late, and a lot of things have happened today. I'll let you get some rest, and your birthday presents will still be downstairs tomorrow when you wake up. If we need to, we can talk more about this in the morning, but we will not change our mind on this, Naruto. Unlocking your chakra is not worth risking your life over." Naruto stayed silent as Kushina slowly stood up and left, closing the door behind her. He listened as she stood outside his door for a moment, before letting out a sigh that was muffled by the door and walking back downstairs. Letting out a sigh of his own, Naruto lay down on his bed, still clothed, with one arm over his eyes as he finally let sleep take him. The next morning Naruto was set to tell his family that he had unlocked his chakra, and while he knew they would be angry with him, he knew it would all be okay in the end. He had proven he wasn't as weak as they thought he was, and now they would have no choice but to train him along with both Mito and Urza. Unfortunately, while they were all sat eating dinner, both his mother and father were called for an emergency council meeting, and had to leave before he had a chance to tell them. They had left with Kushina promising they would talk after the meeting was over, but Naruto knew from experience that these meetings could take hours. Mito had quickly taken over the table after breakfast to work on her seals, writing the same ones over and over again until she got it perfect before trying to do it faster. Urza had relocated herself to the training room to practice her kenjutsu, muttering to herself about needing to work on her spear-wielding skills. With nothing else to do, Naruto had decided to look through the presents he had gotten last night, but had left before opening, too upset with the whole situation to stay downstairs. Shikamaru had given him several new chess sets, each styled to look like ninja from each of the 5 great hidden villages. Choji and his family had given him a cookbook, with hundreds of different recipes. He had even gotten a bonsai tree from Ino and her father, along with the equipment he would need to care for it. There were several other presents from the different clans along the same lines, all of them unsurprisingly avoiding being anything to do with shinobi training, unlike what had been given to his sisters. He did end up with a decent amount of money through, which he was sure would be useful. It wasn't surprising really, there was not a whole lot known about it, so it would no doubt be difficult to buy presents for him. When he had come to a small bundle wrapped in paper with pictures of toads on it, Naruto had debated for several minutes on just throwing it away before putting it down and ignoring it. Then he came to the presents from his family. Mito had given him a notebook filled with blank pages of high-grade paper, with Urza giving him a set of charcoal pencils for drawing. Somehow he thought it might be a cooperative gift between the two of them. His parents had given him a framed picture of all of them together in a group, a perfect family, all of them smiling at the camera. It had Naruto standing in the middle with Urza on his right and Mito on his left, both hugging his arms to themselves, huddling his smaller frame between them. His mother and father were knelt behind them, Minato with his arm around his wife's waist and Kushina giving the peace sign, a large grin on her face as she looked into the camera. Naruto remembered it being taken a week before they had started training his sisters, back when they were one big happy family. Letting out a sigh after seeing the picture, Naruto got up and decided to go for a walk to clear his head, knowing his parents wouldn't be home for another few hours at the least. He didn't bother telling either of his sisters he was going out, planning on being back before they really noticed. He also didn't want to risk one or both of them insisting they come with him, which, especially after his outburst last night, he knew had no doubt they would do. Using the same method as when he left to unlock his chakra, Naruto made his way over to the loose board in the fence and into the forest without any particular destination in mind, just wandering, letting his feet take him where they may. Yet after about half an hour of just walking and using his newly discovered sensory ability to feel the different things around him, Naruto somehow ended up back in the same clearing he had unlocked his chakra in before. The body of the hawk he had killed was gone, but judging by the trail of blood and feathers, Naruto guessed a fox must have found it and taken it back to its den. After looking around the clearing for a moment, he gave a small shrug before walking over and sitting on the rock that was stuck up slight, protruding from ground in the middle of the clearing. Naruto wasn't sure how long he had been sat there, simply listening to the wind blowing through the leaves and feeling the thousands of tiny chakra signatures of the insects crawling around in the grass below him. However, because of how focused he was, Naruto didn't even realize as the world around him was slowly slipping away. "Well, I must admit this is a nice surprise. I wasn't expecting to see you again for another few years." A soft, sibilant voice spoke up, breaking Naruto out of his meditative trance. Naruto's eyes shot open at the sound of the voice, only to widen in shock at what he saw. He was stood on what seemed to be a stone wall, acting as the border between two landscapes, both of them as different as night and day, literally. On the landscape to his right it looked like the forest that surrounded Konoha, covered in tall lush trees and bathed in bright sunlight, and in the distance there was what looked like a lake. Everything looked alive and healthy, and the air was filled with the sense of nature, and even though he couldn't see any actual animals, it still felt like being in the middle of a peaceful forest. The sky was mostly clear, with the odd clouds slowly floating by in the clear blue sky. The land on his left was the complete polar opposite, however. It seemed to have been bleached of all color. The earth was barren and was covered in dry sand that was as white as bone and swirled around in the air, pushed about by the slight wind. Just like on the other side there were trees, but unlike the other side they were as dry and white as the sand and looked dead, their shriveled branches looking like they were clawing angrily at the sky. There were also several rocky outcrops bunched together, their shadows seeming to be stretching further than should be possible. The stones themselves were black as night. And unlike its counterpart on the other side of the wall, there was absolutely no life at all. The wall Naruto was stood on was probably as tall as the Hokage mountain and looked almost 300 foot wide, and made from a dull gray stone. However, the thing that shocked Naruto even more was the fact that above his head there was a giant gray orb, very similar to the one he had eaten from the bird, only with a purple center that seemed to act as the sun for both sides of the world. Not what you were expecting, I imagine. Just take your time and absorb it all. After all, it's not easy to see your own soul in physical form. The soft voice continued echoing slightly. Naruto quickly turned around, looking for where the voice had came from, his eyes widening even further in shock as he found its source, Naruto taking a step back in fear as he did so. Standing on the wall not 10 feet away, was a boy the same age as him. But Naruto couldn't understand what he was seeing, because the boy looked like he could be his long-lost twin. He had the same face as Naruto, he even had the same whisker marks, but unlike Naruto though, his short spiky hair was pure white and his skin had a grayish tinge to it. Sticking out of the top of his head were a pair of 4-inch long horns the same color as his skin, and unlike Naruto he was wearing a large baggy black shirt and a pair of black shorts. On his feet he wore nothing at all. He also had a knife without a guard, the handle wrapped in bandages tucked into the belt at his waist. As he stood before Naruto he had his hand resting on the handle. But the thing that really took Naruto back though were the eyes of the lookalike in front of him. Instead of white scale were dark black, with dark veins spreading out onto the skin around his eyes like spider webs. Then there were the iris, 2 burning red eyes that stood out, making him look absolutely terrifying. Naruto watched as his mouth opened, revealing his sharp pearly white teeth and a long dark tongue as he chuckled slightly at Naruto's reaction. "You're not going to piss yourself, are you? Because if you do I am not cleaning it up," the voice said mockingly. The teasing tone was easy to hear, but what was more unnerving was that it was said in Naruto's own voice, and that surprise was enough to give Naruto a little of his courage back. "Who the hell are you?" Naruto said in a slightly shaky voice as he stared at the boy opposite in surprise. The boy just gave another chuckle and moved over to stand next to Naruto, before turning and looking out over the dark landscape, his hand still on his blade. "Relax, I'm not going to hurt you, not even sure I can, to be honest. After all, we are technically brothers," the boy said, not looking at Naruto as he continued to stare out at the dark landscape. Frowning at the boy's words as he stared at his back, taking note that he had exactly the same slight build as Naruto himself had, Naruto took a deep breath to steel himself before he moved so he standing next to the terrifying-looking boy. "Who are you?" Naruto asked, calming down slightly now the boy was no longer looking at him with those terrifying, unnerving predator-like eyes of his. Naruto watched as the boy licked his lips, a habit he knew he himself had. "Well, now you see, that is quite an interesting question, as not even I am entirely sure of just who I am. Am I you, a stronger, more powerful version of you? Or am I something else entirely that has just taken your form? It really is quite the quandary, as in a way I am you. I know everything you know and I feel everything you feel. But yet I also know so much more than you know, and have experience beyond what you have experienced." Voice continued curiously, the voice becoming more and more like Naruto's own soft-spoken tone as he spoke. What?" Naruto asked, his face scrunched up in confusion as he tried to dissect the boy's words. "I don't know, just call me you, I suppose." The boy spoke up again, the intimidating aura he first gave off fading the more he spoke. "Wait, so I should call you Naruto?" "No, just call me you." "So call you me?" "No, you." "Naruto? Are we really going to go this?" the mysterious boy said, his soft silky voice holding a note of amusement. "It is kind of fun," Naruto replied, a smile on his face as he argued with himself. He was to tell anyone in Konoha about this, they would no doubt think him mad. Though after his outburst last night, that may not surprise them. It was as he thought that Naruto's good mood came crashing down. "Yeah, you have been having a pretty shit time of it recently, haven't you?" the voice said crudely, the statement made all the strange by how calmly it was spoken. It was not really that surprising that the boy knew of Naruto's thought, he had said it himself after all. He knew everything Naruto knew and yet so much more. "So where are we then?" Naruto replied uncomfortably, the boy quickly changing the topic of the conversation, not quite ready or willing to talk it all out yet. Well, I would have thought that was obvious. I mean, we are obviously not in Konoha and you are talking to yourself," you replied blandly, only to frown slightly as he saw the confusion still on Naruto's face. Letting out a sigh, he decided to answer properly this time. We're in your mindscape, a physical representation of your mind and soul. But then why are you here? Why are we here? As he heard this question, the smile finally slipped from the now identified youth's face, his lips slipping into a hard line as his eyes hardened slightly. Until 9 years ago I didn't exist. What I was before that even I don't know. What I do know though is that I came into being on the same day you did, but unlike you I was not born into the natural world, I was born in you. From what I have been able to theorize, I owe my existence to whatever your father Minato Namikaze did on the day the Kyuubi attacked. I gained form at the same time the Kyuubi was sealed into your sisters, and the form I gained was yours. What I was before that I don't know. But from what little I do know, there was another being present on the night your father sealed the Kyuubi into your sisters. To defeat the beast, your father used the Death Reaper seal, a technique that was designed by the Uzumaki clan centuries ago. It was a seal that was supposed to summon the form of the Shinigami into being. Now if things had gone as they should, your father would have had his own soul taken as collateral for sealing away the Kyuubi. But yet he didn't. You said, a frown on his face as he spoke. This was all just theories he had put together from the fractured knowledge he was born into being in possession of. Whether his theory was right or wrong, the boy did not know at this stage. It was then that he rolled his eyes and turned to face Naruto, before letting out a sigh. This is all of course just a conclusion I have come to based off of my knowledge and memories, but I believe that I was never meant to be self-aware or even exist. I think that when the Shinigami was summoned that night, something unexpected happened, something which led to me being created. I believe something was different about the seal he used, and that somehow a fragment of death's power was split off from the source, and instead of dispersing it clung to the closest available host, you. This led to the creation of me, a piece of foreign energy that gained sentience, and was given life. It is a strange thought, isn't it, that from death there came life? Which I guess means you could say that I'm like a tailed beast, a sentient mass of chakra, single piece torn from the whole. Which by the way would technically make you my Jinchuriki. Hearing that explanation, Naruto couldn't help but frown. It sounded bizarre, but thinking on it more he began to think that the boy may be right. After all, had he not devoured what he had come to believe was a soul just the other night, and also wasn't the art of Fuinjutsu very finicky? A single line, even a millimeter out of place, could drastic change the end result, and wouldn't his father have been in a hurry when he was drawing the seal he used to defeat the Kyuubi? That being said, though he was making a very strong effort to put the whole Jinchuriki of death thing aside for the moment, he could freak out about that later. He had other things he wanted to find out first. So you're really the Shinigami? You're not exactly what I was expecting. Naruto trailed off, deciding to embrace the explanation you had given him. After all, it was the only one he had heard, and the boy seemed sincere in his belief. This comment seemed to snap you out of his contemplative mood, a small smirk appearing on his face instead, as he let out a slight chuckle. Well, technically if I am right, which I believe I am, then I am just a fragment of the Shinigami, and am a whole other being entirely now, thanks in part to you, Naruto. You said, a grin on his face as he saw the frown of confusion on Naruto's face. Besides, I am probably more similar to you than the Shinigami. I did after all grow up experiencing the same things as you did, only I had other memories on top of that. Oh, and I was also better looking. We look pretty much exactly the same. True, except I have badass white hair and cool eyes. As you said this, Naruto once again looked at the boy's eyes, barely stopping himself from shivering as the two ominous red and black orbs looked at him. They were the eyes of a predator, an apex one at that. The white hair makes you look like an old man. Naruto managed to get out as he tore his gaze away from his counterpart's eyes, Naruto finally giving into his childish side. He had only just turned 10 after all. You're just jealous. You replied, a calm expression on his face as he did so. They were able to hold straight faces for all of 5 seconds before both burst out laughing at the same time, the situation so odd that it was hilarious. By the time they had calmed down, Naruto had completely forgotten his fear of you, and was using his shoulder to hold himself up and keep his balance. It was then that something Naruto had heard his parents telling Nito and Urza came to him, something important about Jinchuriki. Wait, if I'm technically a Jinchuriki, then why am I always sick? I thought Jinchuriki didn't get sick, Naruto asked, a frown on his face as he took a step away, his eyes taking in how his counterpart's body looked just as frail and gaunt as his own. Because you're not actually sick, at least not in the way everyone thinks. You replied confidently, knowing that what he said now was absolute fact. But the doctors. Naruto, I am not normal. I don't eat human food, and because of the way the seal that sucked me into you works, we are one. Just as I took on your form and characteristics, so too did you take on some of my traits. Your body needs a mix of human food and what you humans call souls. Like that thing you found floating above the hawk. Chakra is life energy, And when something or someone dies, it forms into a mass invisible to the normal eye. When you were a baby, your parents realized something was wrong, and you were diagnosed with that genetic disorder thing. The doctors didn't know about me, so they came to the only conclusion they could. It's all bullshit, of course. You just needed to unlock our chakra so you could see the souls and eat them. That's why I helped you find it last time you were here. So the more souls I eat, the healthier I get? Basically, yes, and just like in nature, your body and abilities have adapted in order to help you survive. You turned to look out over the side of the wall filled with life. Just as Naruto turned, he saw the first sign of animal life, a hawk breaking cover from the tops of the trees before diving back down and out of sight again. Look familiar? It should. Your mindscape is the afterlife for the souls you eat and imprisons them here, their energy feeding both of us while they continue to live on. That is why it's split in half. The light is the pure world and the dark is the impure world. That hawk we just saw was the one you saw when you unlocked your chakra. But animals don't have the same awareness as a human, meaning they cannot be good or evil, unlike humans who are responsible for their actions. Naruto found himself silently listening as you continued to speak, ideally watching as the hawk reappeared only to disappear again several times. I can see the life of the souls when they come. When you eat a human soul, it is me who processes them. The wall is the border between the two lands, a barrier that only we can cross. To put it more simply, you are the outer Naruto whilst I am the inner Naruto. Together we are one. Unlike the Jinchuriki, though we are a symbiotic life form, we cannot survive without working together, and if one of us dies, the other will quickly follow. As for all my claims, I am not the true Shinigami. I am not immortal, nor do I have absolute control over death. You said as he looked his counterpart in the eye, willing him to understand what he was saying, what he knew himself to be absolute fact. Nodding his head as Naruto once again met Yu's gaze, this time easily resisting the need to flinch. As he did so, Naruto knew what you said was true. He didn't know why and so would never be able to explain it, but deep down he knew. Seeming to have finished his explanation, Yu turned away from Naruto and once again looked out at the scenery, as the blonde did the same. Naruto, you need to leave the hidden leaf. Naruto could actually feel his mind stop, all thoughts hitting an invisible wall as his eyes widened. What? But why? Letting out a sigh, you walked over to the edge of the wall facing what Naruto now knew to be called Pure World, sitting on the edge and fingering the hilt of his knife. Naruto, do you know what Jinchuriki are used for, besides containing tailed beasts? You finally spoke up, still looking over the peaceful forests and glades that made up the Pure World. Naruto could only shake his head in the negative as he slowly moved to sit beside you, the white-haired boy letting out another sigh. Turning to face Naruto, you gave him a conflicted look. They might be the same age, but you, unlike Naruto, had fragments of memories and knowledge far beyond his counterpart. This made him more world-wearied, more experienced than Naruto, who in Yu's eyes was still so young and naive. They are weapons, Naruto, used both as a deterrent and when necessary tools of war. Your status as the son of the Hokage is enough to protect your sisters and maybe even you from the worst of it, but the fact is you are one of a kind even among other Jinchuriki. There has never been a Jinchuriki for anything other than the tailed beasts, let alone one with the abilities you possess. You are unique and have the potential to be very powerful, and even in the leaf there are people that would try and use you for their own gain. But my family would probably fight and die to protect you, at first, but the fact is they also have the interests of the village to look out for. Why do you think it is so important for Mito and Urza to learn to control the Nine Tails chakra, not suppress it? Whilst it is in their best interests anyway, it is also in the interest of the village to have them strong. And more than that, Naruto, in the eyes of many you would be an abomination, a being who needs to feast on the souls of others to survive. I doubt even our family could do much against the backlash and fear that knowledge, if it got out, would cause. But that is working of the fact that they themselves wouldn't fear us. We are unnatural, Naruto, and a fact of the world is that people fear that which is alien to them. Naruto found himself unable to look at you at this point, his eyes slowly becoming hollow as he thought of how his family would react. A part of them hoped that they would accept him, but that part was overshadowed by the fear that they wouldn't. Naruto had after all seen the reactions some of the villagers of Konoha had when they thought that people weren't looking. The civilians, they looked at his sisters with fear, and in some cases hate, and those two were the prized children of the beloved Hokage. Naruto, he was the black sheep of the family. Already his presence unnerved people. That discomfort would be made 1,000 times worse if people found out the truth. And in Naruto's young mind, his parents, who had already proven themselves untrustworthy by lying to him, they too might turn on him if they found out the truth. When he did look up again, the fear of abandonment and isolation on his face, he felt you lay a gentle hand on his shoulder. Turning to the boy, he said, a kind and understanding look on his face. Naruto, I am not telling you this to hurt you, and if you want to stay in the village I will never say anything about this again. But you needed to hear this. People have been looking for a way to control or avoid death since man first understood the concept. You are a 5-course meal placed in front of a starving pack of wolves. At the moment they don't know you are there, but when they do they will fight each other and eat you alive. And nothing and no one will be able to protect us, not even ourselves, not unless we get stronger. Tears began to fall now, and the grip on his shoulder tightened slightly as his shoulder started to shake with suppressed sobs. I understand we have to leave, it is not safe for us here anymore, and I don't know if Mom or Dad would support us. I just can't trust them anymore. Then we need to go, Naruto, carve our own path in this world. Become so powerful that we will never have to rely on others to protect ourselves. You said, fiercely, watching as a fire seemed to start to burn in Naruto, a slight smile on his face as he did so. Deep down Naruto knew he was right, and as he stood there and won that wall between light and dark he made his decision. He would become strong, he would become powerful, and never again will he have to feel as weak and powerless as he did now. With Naruto. In the end, Naruto didn't tell his family about unlocking his chakra, nor did he even try to bring up anything to do with chakra or training for the next few weeks. In fact, he went out of his way to be nice and quiet, even going so far as to sit outside in the shade and watch as Urza and Nito trained. His family seemed to think it was because of him finally accepting that he would never be a ninja and that he was making efforts to try and move on. But he hadn't, so when no one was looking he had started to prepare, waiting for the perfect moment to run. He already had everything planned out. He knew how he was going to get past the gate guards and he knew where he was heading. All that he needed to do now was to wait for the right time to leave. Naruto had just finished laying the things Itachi had given him for his birthday out on his bed, staring at them with hard eyes as he took the time to carefully examine each item. The seal had actually hidden a lot more than he expected, and still had room for more things to be put inside it. There was a thick gray and black coat with warm fur interior and an attached hood, and when Naruto put it on he found that it was a bit big for his gaunt frame, the coat ending just below his knees, with the sleeves stretching past his hands and the hood covering everything but his mouth. It was warm and cozy, but more importantly it offered him some slight protection, and also could be used as half-decent camouflage in a dark area. There were also 3 scrolls, one which listed several simple chakra exercises and the other which contained the basics on how to write seals. Naruto had looked through both, frowning at some of the seal designs. The last was about the different hand signs and how they direct chakra through the body, with sketches of each sign to show how it should be done. Then there was the blade, a sheathed knife with a foot and a half blade and no guard with the handle wrapped in bandages, making him think of the knife you had. It actually looked a lot like the sort of blade he had seen Anbu carry, normally hidden under their cloaks or on their backs. The sheath was gray and the blade itself was both shape and polished to a shine, which confused Naruto because ninja blades were never polished to the point where it might catch the light and alert the target. A blank forehead protector attached to black cloth sat next to the blade, something that was usually worn by ninja that didn't have a village but weren't missing nin. Ninja like that were very rare these days, though before the formation of the hidden villages they were almost all there was. If Naruto remembered correctly they were called lone nin, or wandering nin. There was also a compass that folded up into a small box that fit into a pocket on the cloak. The last thing that had been inside the seal was a large piece of wood, where a note had been attached which was in Naruto's hands at the moment, as he read it over again. True ninja start as a blank slate, carving and shaping themselves through training, constantly working on themselves over time until the mask they create is their true face. Carve your own mask, and prove them all wrong for ever doubting you. And remember, fear can be as lethal a weapon as any blade, you just have to learn how to use it. Give the world a reason to respect and fear you. Itachi Uchiha. Putting the note down, Naruto sat in his desk chair with his kunai and the piece of wood, which was already showing signs of being carved. Itachi had unknowingly given Naruto everything he would need to not only get out of the village, but to also set him on the right path to surviving outside its protection too. Now it was just a matter of waiting for the right moment. The next day Naruto told his family that he was going to go around to the Nara compound to see his friend Shikamaru for a game of chess, and when Kushina offered to walk him there he quickly told her not to worry, and that he would go straight there and back when he was done. However, the moment he was sure that she had stopped following him from the rooftops, Naruto changed his destination and made for his clearing, the scroll on chakra exercises tucked into his inside pocket. After reading through the list of exercises Naruto had found two that he thought would be useful to know before he left, though he was aware that he would be lucky to be able to learn one. The first he was going to try was tree walking, which not only worked as a chakra exercises but was also a useful skill in general. Deciding at the last moment to take his shoes off before starting, Naruto turned his attention to one of the trees and ran straight at it. Jumping as he got close, Naruto aimed his body so he would hit it feet first, only for it not to stick, causing him to fall on his side. Crap! Rubbing his left arm where he landed on it, Naruto sent a glare at the tree before walking back to his starting point and running at the tree once again. This time Naruto put as much chakra into his feet as he could at the time, his feet actually beginning to glowing a faint grayish-blue color. This time when he hit the tree, Naruto didn't slip off, instead he was launched backwards across the clearing. Hitting the ground with his back and a loud thud, Naruto groaned as he stared at the sky for a moment and watched a cloud slowly fly over the clearing. Letting out a sigh, he pulled himself back up to his feet before trying again. However, when he looked at the tree, Naruto was confused to see that instead of an indent in the wood where he was shot off, there was a black mark in the shape of his foot. Moving closer to get a better look, Naruto saw that the footprint was where the wood seemed to have died, leaving the rest of the tree health. Well, that was something? Naruto watched with narrowed eyes and arm out as the grayish-blue mass of chakra moved around the clearing, taking the shape of an ethereal blue hawk for 1 second only for it to fade back into a formless mass the next. It circled around the edge of the trees 2 more times before landing on the rock next to him, once again taking the form of a hawk. The bird itself had an almost ghostly appearance, with the main feature being its glowing purple eyes that gave off the only other light in the otherwise pitch-black room. Even while in a recognizable form, the bird held no details, just a grayish-blue mass of chakra with eyes. Every twitch caused its form to blur slightly, as if it was struggling to keep its form. Naruto was sweating now, his arms shaking slightly as he tried to focus. He held it for another 2 minutes before letting out a gasp and his arm fell, the bird instantly losing its form as he did so. When it did, the mass of chakra lost all its form and streamed into his body, the chakra quickly being absorbed through his skin, sending a sudden new rush of energy through his body as it did. Letting out a sigh as he lay back on the rock, Naruto took his hoodie that he had set on the rock next to him and used it to wipe away the sweat on his face while frowning at seemingly nothing. Better, but still not enough, the soft voice of you said in his mind, the voice echoing slightly as it did so. Jumping to his feet, Naruto started slowly walking around clearing for a few minutes to stretch his legs, before sitting back down on the rock. Again you said to him, a hint of amusement in the voice as Naruto let out a tired groan. Naruto's hands flashed through the few hand seals he needed, even if they were slower than most genin would be able to, taking in a deep breath as he did. Soul release, spirit summoning jutsu. Letting out his breath, Naruto watched as once again the grayish-blue chakra was released from his body and streamed into the air. It swirled in the air for a moment, before slowly lowering to the ground and molding into the shape of a large ethereal rat, which like the hawk had glowing purple light for eyes. He held the last seal for a moment, letting it go, and held his hand out towards the rat. As he did so, the tips of his fingers flashing with chakra before it faded away. Naruto let out a sigh as he moved his hand, and the rat followed it almost like a puppet on strings, shifting in and out of focus like the hawk had as he climbed up the rock and onto his knee where it sat staring at him with its blank purple eyes. Naruto absently noted the cold patch slowly spreading across his skin around where the rat was sat, followed by the sensation of pins and needles. This was the first jutsu Naruto had made himself, with help of course. With the scroll and hand signs and he had been able to start creating his own style of jutsu based off of the abilities that he got from being the Jinchuriki of Death. The ability he was using at the moment was one which he had based off of the summoning jutsu he had seen both Jiraiya and his father performing. It had taken time to figure out the correct sequence, and a few near misses, but they were going in the right direction. The jutsu took the same amount of chakra to create the spirit as Naruto gained from eating its soul, and when it was released the chakra returned to him minus a little depending on how long it was summoned and what he had it doing. He had worked out from discussions with you and experimentation that the souls he devoured acted similar to batteries, which meant that he could draw on the chakra that a soul possessed and use it to bolster his own reserves. There was a side effect of this though, as if he drew too much energy from a soul it would not have the time to recharge and would therefore destabilize and disperse. An issue with his newly made technique though, was that the sudden drop in chakra while not life-threatening was exhausting, and even though when it returned it was like getting an adrenaline rush. The second issue was that at the moment it was very hard to control the spirit after it formed, and if he didn't concentrate it would just act like a normal animal and do its own thing. The advantages of the technique though were however more than worth the effort to learn it, as well as the time he was putting into it. Along with getting the chakra of the souls he consumed, Naruto also got their most recent memories. It was limited though, as the memories he absorbed could be anything from the last few days to the last few months. It was a little odd at first, and had given him more than a few headaches before he had gotten used to it. Then there was the fact that his spirits had more in common with ghosts than he had expected, and were able to actually move through solid objects. It was useful skill to be sure, but still very surprising when you see it for the first time. Fortunately, when it came to summoning the souls as spirits, he was able to get all of the memories they gathered whilst on the mortal plane when they were released. Unfortunately, though, he was still having a problem with making them solid enough to actually attack, because at the moment they just passed through everything they touched. But despite this, it was definitely turning into a very useful jutsu. Already he was thinking of ways it can be used for scouting. This time Naruto let the spirit go before he started to strain, the chakra floating back into his body once more. As it turned out, Naruto's chance to escape came sooner than he had been expecting. Barely 4 weeks after his 10th birthday were his parents once again called to another council meeting. And just like last time, they once again left him with his sisters. He waited about an hour after they left before he claimed that he was tired and so was going to bed early, either Mito nor Urza thinking to argue or question him. Sometimes being seen as weak and frail was useful. Once he was in his room, Naruto worked quickly, gathering everything he was taking with him and packing it all into a small bag, with everything important sealed into the sealing scroll Itachi had given him for his birthday. He then put the black coat on, making sure it was zipped up before climbing out his window. He then used the drain pipe to climb down, before running to his usual exit behind the bush at the back of the family's training ground. By this time the sun had just started to set, making the shadows longer and giving him more than enough cover as he carefully made his way through the village and in the direction of the north gate. He had timed it perfectly, arriving just as the last few merchant caravans were lining up to leave before the gates were locked for the rest of the night. Bracing himself in the shadow of one of the nearby buildings that lined the main road out of the village, Naruto started to count in his head. 1, 2, 3. Jumping out of the shadows, Naruto rapidly closed the distance between himself and the last caravan in the line, rolling as he hit the floor until he was face up looking at the underside of the caravan and at the slightly rusty metal frame. He then used the first and only chakra exercise he had learned from the scroll Itachi had given him, channeling it to both his hands and feet so he was sticking to the underside of the now moving caravan and using the dark color of his coat to blend into the shadows again. Naruto tried to make himself as comfortable as he possibly could. With Mito. Mito ignored the sweat dripping down her face, the feeling of her heart pumping faster than usual, and the slight ache in her muscles. All her focus was on the punching bag in front of her, swinging back and forth as she continued to nail it with rapid strikes, the young girl trying to keep her breathing under control as she went through her training. She could also hear Urza on the other side of the indoor training room, the sound of the spear in her hands cutting through the air over and over again, as she meticulously went through the different fighting forms that their mother had taught her when she was tutoring her in the art of kenjutsu. This was how Mito kept her mind off of all the other things going on in her life, a way to clear her mind, so to speak. She knew Urza too had a similar method, though instead of a punching bag she would practice with her many different weapons over and over again until the muscle memory was firmly fixed into her body and mind. She also knew that they were both trying to distract themselves from thinking about the same thing, their brother Naruto. Mito could still fondly remember their brother when they were much younger. She could remember him coming to their room in the middle of the night and asking to stay with them because he had just had a nightmare. But that had been years ago, and it was the fact that it seemed so long ago that now gave those once happy memories a depressing aftertaste. Naruto had always been so small and fragile. He was more like a little brother than one who was the same age as them. When their mother and father had started training them both, Mito and Urza had been so excited, so much so that they didn't even notice how Naruto had been left out, at least not until a few weeks later. By the time they did, Naruto was already different. He didn't smile as much or ask for help. He also seemed more reclusive, flinching away from any attempts to make physical contact with him. But sometimes Mito had seen how he had looked at them, a hurt look on his face on more than one occasion, and every time she had seen it, it had always felt like a knife in her chest. But after the party, things seemed to have changed for the better, as while he had still seemed sad, Naruto had once again started smiling. He had even started coming outside to watch them train and had actually started talking to them again, making a real effort to communicate with the rest of the family. It wasn't the same as before they started training, but it was better than they had been for a long time. It almost seemed as if their family were once again on track to being happy and whole. It was also a lie. Mito could see it, and she was sure Urza could too, the looks Naruto would send them when he thought no one was looking. The almost invisible way he was forcing smiles that just didn't reach his eyes, the tensing of his shoulders when they made physical contact. She had asked her mother about it, but Kushina had just said she would take care of it, and that there was nothing to worry about. But that just didn't seem right to Mito. Why did Naruto have to be left out while they got to go to the academy? Now that they were 10, they would be going full-time to the Shinobi Academy for the next 3 years. Naruto, though, wasn't going to be joining them. Why did he have to adjust in the first place? Mito let out a loud grunt as she went into a flurry of punches, putting even more power into her strikes than she was before. Unfortunately though, she couldn't keep it up for long, and within 5 minutes Mito was forced to stop as she leaned forward and panted, drawing in great lungfuls of air as sweat began to drip down her face. When she got her breath back, Mito glared at the punching bag as if it had done something to personally offend her, before giving it one more hit before she turned to see Urza in a similar state to her, with the spear her sister had been training with lying on the floor at her feet. Urza, we have to do something, this isn't right, Mito said, still trying to catch her breath as she made eye contact with her sister. Letting out a sigh, Urza frowned slightly and gave a nod, before tiredly picking up the spear she had been using and returning it to its place on the wall. I know, Mito, but what can we do? Mom and Dad are right, Naruto is just too delicate, and shinobi training is pretty brutal, it might actually kill him. She replied, her tone firm as she echoed the words she had heard spoken between their parents when they discussing precisely this thing. We don't know that, maybe he could learn genjutsu? Mito said uncertainly as she tried to think of less intensive forms of shinobi arts her brother could practice. Urza seemed to think over this suggestion for a moment, before she shook her head with a frown. He'd need to unlock his chakra, and even that is risky with his body so weak. Mito let out a small growl of frustration, hating it when Urza used logic against her like that. But before she could think of another argument, Kushina poked her head into the room and smiled at them, the smell of dinner drifting in through the now open door. Hey girls, dinner is almost ready. Have you seen your brother? The older redhead asked, a smile on her face as she looked at the tired forms of her two daughters. Urza spoke before Mito, drawing their mother's attention. He went to take a nap not long after you and Dad left for that council meeting. Kushina just gave them another smile and left, but not before asking them to set the table for dinner, earning herself a groan from her two tired daughters as she left the room and went to wake up Naruto. With Kushina. Kushina frowned when she opened the door to Naruto's room and found the window wide open, with there being no sign of her son in sight. Quickly closing the window, Kushina gave another quick glance around the room before deciding to look somewhere else, closing the door behind her as she did so. She went to the library but quickly saw no one had been inside since they had left for the council meeting. She then checked the girls' rooms but there was still no sign of him. Frowning, Kushina gave up looking and decided to do it the easy way, forming a hand sign and using her Uzumaki-inherited sensory ability to scan the house for Naruto's chakra signature. Knowing that even with his chakra locked she would be able to sense him, as while even not active all living things had at least a tiny amount of chakra, meaning she would be able to feel Naruto's chakra no matter where he was in the house. At least she should have been able to, but after checking twice Kushina could still not feel anything within the house that could be Naruto. Starting to get worried, Kushina broke the hand sign and quickly made her way downstairs and into the living room, just as the girls finished setting the table for dinner. Hey Urza, are you sure Naruto didn't go out? Maybe to the Nara clan compound to visit his friend Shikamaru? She asked, a worried look on her face as she tried to think of where her son could have gotten to. Her words got both girls' attention, but their confused expressions only caused her worry to grow. Urza finally answered just as Minato walked into the room, a large family-sized bowl of ramen in his hands with a ladle sticking out the top. No, he defiantly said he was going to take a nap, right Mito? She said, looking at her sister for confirmation. Yeah, Mito said, a frown beginning to form on her own face. Kushina's hands had started to shake and her skin began to pale, signs that Minato quickly recognized as he put the ramen down and moved to stand by her side. Kushina, what's wrong? Where is Naruto? Kushina started to feel dizzy, her mouth becoming unbelievably dry as she somehow choked her next words out. I don't know. With Naruto. 2 hours of sticking to the underside of a merchant caravan along an uneven bumpy dirt road and a painful leg cramp later, Naruto was ready to make his next move. Being careful not to stop channeling his chakra and becoming unstuck, Naruto carefully pulled out one of his old shirts and tied one of the sleeves to the bottom of the caravan so it would trail along the floor. After making sure it was tied tightly, Naruto finally stopped channeling his chakra and dropped to the ground before quickly rolling to the right and off the road and instead into a small ditch. Staying still for several minutes and listening as the caravan slowly moved away without stopping, the blonde waited until he was sure that no one had seen him, before letting out a slight sigh of relief. Licking his lips, Naruto stood up and stretched, trying to work the kinks in his body out, before he reached into his pocket and pulled out the new compass Itachi had bought him. Getting his bearing, Naruto nodded to himself before he turned so he was facing a southeasterly direction before he started walking, leaving the road and heading in the direction of the where hopefully the closest port town would be, where he would be able to find a boat that could take him to his destination. He stayed on the ground for the next hour, slowly walking through the trees and taking his time. At one point he was able to hit a rabbit he saw with his kunai, and after eating its soul wrapped the body up to cook later. The sun had long set by this point, and the only thing lighting his way was the moonlight that shone through the trees, casting ominous shadows across the landscape. Once he was sure that there was no possible way for anyone passing by on the road to see or hear him, Naruto licked his lips and looked up into the trees before bending his knees and pouring chakra into both his legs and feet. With a small burst of chakra that left the grass he had been standing on brown and shriveled, Naruto shot up and into the trees, landing on a thick branch and grabbing the trunk of the tree he had landed on to keep his balance. He turned and looked back at where he had been stood with a frown. All living things had chakra, even plants. But according to you, his chakra held an imprint of death, and it was that imprint that affected the chakra of the living. It wasn't enough to kill people or even animals on its own, but plants and trees were an entirely different story. Until he had better control, his chakra would kill any plant life it came directly in contact with, which was the main reason had walked so far before starting to tree hop. It was less noticeable than an actual trail of dead footprints. Naruto's plan was to head to the east coast of the Land of Fire, where he would hopefully be able to take a boat to the Land of Whirlpools, his mother's homeland. The hidden Whirlpool village had long ago been destroyed in the Second Great Shinobi War after a joint attack by the hidden villages of the Cloud, Mist and Rock, with the island having been abandoned ever since. Finding a ship that would be able to take him there would certainly not be easy. With Kushina. As Kushina ran through the wooded landscape of the Land of Fire, she made sure to keep her breathing, even as she followed behind Kakashi, who was in turn following his Neendog summon, Pakin and the rest of his Neendog pack. They had been following Naruto's scent all night after having found it leading out of the north gate, but now an hour later Kushina was getting worried. On either side of her were two Anbu, with another two trailing behind her at the back of the group, all of them scanning the surroundings as they looked for any sign of the only son of the fourth Hokage. If they followed the scent for any longer, Kushina knew that it would not be much longer before they would hit the border between the Land of Fire and the Land of Rice, and if they didn't catch up with the boy and whoever had taken him before they hit the border, then they would lose him. Whoever took Naruto knew how to hide their own scent, but they seemed to have forgotten to or just couldn't do the same for Naruto as they had done for themselves. Oddly enough though, the kidnappers had been sticking to the road as they traveled, which to the trained shinobi made no sense if they wanted to avoid being tracked. Or maybe that was the point. Maybe the perpetrators were trying to lead them in this direction so that those who followed would think it was a different village. In the end though, all Kushina could think about though was who took him, and why anyone would take Naruto in the first place. Considering the direction they were going, Kushina would suspect the hidden Cloud Village. After all, they had a history of trying to steal clan members from Konoha, and had not only attempted to steal the Hyuga heiress, but had even attempted to kidnap her when she was a child. Luckily though, on both occasions they were stopped by Minato, and the specific perpetrators given swift justice. But with Naruto's illness he would be no use for trying to start a branch Uzumaki clan in the Hidden Cloud. They would have taken one of the girls if not both if they had wanted to do that. The natural Uzumaki abilities, their unique chakra and bloodlines and their natural skill with Fuinjutsu, all of this combined with just how few members still lived made Kushina and her children very tempting targets for one of the more unscrupulous hidden villages. Earth Country was also a possibility. The Hidden Rock Village hated Minato enough to take Naruto, and had always maintained the belief that Minato had a bloodline, not believing that the man had given himself the name Namikaze when he left the academy. But if it was the Hidden Rock Village, then they were going in the wrong direction, and Kushina didn't even want to think what they would do to him if it was actually them. But the truth was it could be any of the other hidden villages, even their allies weren't above suspicion. The closer they got to the border the more Kushina felt the tears building in her eyes try and escape, causing her to blink rapidly to try and stop them. Then it happened. Kakashi's pack came to an abrupt stop as if they had hit an invisible wall. They all came to a stop behind them, looking ahead in a vain attempt to see if they could spot some sign of Naruto or his captors. Kushina was able to hold herself together for all of about 5 seconds before trying to run forward across the border, only for wooden beams to shoot out of the ground and wrap around her like snakes. Before she could move an inch, her arms were held at her side and her feet forced together. There was even a beam around her neck to stop her head moving. Kushina though didn't seem to care as she desperately thrashed around wildly for several minutes, before letting out a growl when she realized it was no use, and instead moved her eyes to glare at the dragon-masked Anbu who had his hands held up forming a sign. "Let me go, Tenzo!" Kushina spat out the venom in her voice, making the other shinobi around the shift around uncomfortably. "I'm sorry, Lady Kushina, but I cannot allow you to cross the border without first asking the daimyo for his permission first. The Land of Rice is currently allied with Earth Country, making it hostile territory. Entering without the consent could be taken as an act of war." The now named Tenzo said in a monotone voice as he continued to restrain the angry wife of his Hokage. I don't care. Let me go. As Kushina said that, she began to thrash again, an action which caused a loud creaking noise, something which unnerved both Kakashi and the gathered ANB when they realized that it was coming from the now cracking wood restraints. Thinking quickly, Kakashi ran over and spoke to Kushina, being careful to keep his distance just in case. The woman was known for her fiery temper after all, which when combined with her formidable skills as a shinobi made her a quite frightening person. Lady Kushina, please calm down and think. You can't help Naruto by starting the next great shinobi war. The trail has gone cold for now. What we need to do is to return to the village and regroup with Minato. He can recall Lord Jiraiya and we can start searching again when we get a new trail, so please just stop. As Kakashi said this, he bravely moved in front of Kushina, blocking her way, arms held up as he tried to calm the raging mother. She was still struggling slightly even after Kakashi finished talking, but now it seemed less fierce and more forced. The tears now streaming down her face were heart-wrenching for all those that had the will to look at her face, and when Tenzo finally released her, Kushina fell to her knees and sobbed. Her hair breaking slight at the thought of her weak and frail son being taken out into the big and dangerous world by persons unknown. With Naruto. Naruto was confused when he saw the lights ahead of him. From having studied the maps in his family's library before he left, he knew that he wasn't supposed to have hit the coast for at least another 2 days. Frowning slightly, he pulled out the map he had taken from the clan compound and lay it down on the branch he had just landed on, placing his compass next to it and trailing a finger along the route he had marked so far. Staring at the map, he found nothing that could explain the lights. There shouldn't have been as much as a village or an even small settlement for loggers and their families for miles. And if there was, then he was much further north than he had expected, which would mean he would need to change direction slightly to get back on track. Putting the map away again, Naruto debated walking into the village or simply going around it. He did not want to be seen. A young boy on his own would arouse suspicion after all. But at the same time, if he was found trying to skirt around it without entering, then that would raise even more suspicion. He was quickly brought out of his thoughts, however, by a sudden sound. Aya! And just like that, his decision was soon made for him when the sound of a clearly female scream reached his ears, followed by several others. Quickly jumping closer, Naruto came to a stop just inside the tree line of the small settlement. Only for his eyes to suddenly widen in horror at what he saw before him. The buildings that made up the settlement were all on fire. It seemed as though everyone that lived in the settlement was being herded into one place by a group of what Naruto could only assume were ninja, all dressed in black with hoods and masks so that only their eyes could be seen. The only thing that identified them in any way were the standard shinobi headbands they were wearing, all which displayed what looked like a musical note. The few not hurting the loggers and their families were using fire jutsu to set the buildings on fire, the wood and straw quickly catching and spreading with ease, the flames roaring high into the air with large clouds of black smoke beginning to billow up into the air. Naruto could only watch as people were pushed and kicked, even thrown in the case of several children not moving quick enough until they were all huddled on the ground with the shinobi standing in a circle around them. Looking at the group, Naruto's keen eyes were able to count 11 of them in total, his eyes able to see through the dark like it was day. He was even able to pick up the faint blue outline that surrounded each of the people in the clearing, the outline being stronger around the shinobi. It was at that moment that one of the ninjas stepped forward and pulled his mask down, showing the smirk on his lips as he stared at the cowering people. Alright, you pathetic little shits, I'm going to make this easy on you. Tell us where the boy is, tell us and we will let you live. We know he was in the area recently, we know he was here no more than a day ago. You know who I am talking about, and you know where he is. Tell us, and you live. The man said, his voice holding the arrogance that only those who have wielded power can possess. Naruto had no idea who the man was talking about, but from the looks of the people gathered in the clearing they did. However, from the looks on their faces, Naruto also knew that they didn't know where whoever these men were looking for was, a fact that was confirmed when a large man with arms like tree trunks slowly stood up and moved to stand between the shinobi that was talking and the rest of his people. He was here, not a few hours ago. But we don't know where he is now, he was just passing through. The leader didn't even spare the man a glance. Instead, he simply flicked his hand out and threw a kunai aimed right at the man's head. Naruto, who against all logically reason had been preparing himself to jump down and attempt to stop it, the muscles in his legs tightening as he crouched. However, before his feet even left the branch, something odd happened. The kunai stopped in midair, not an inch from the logger's face, as the man fell onto his back with wide eyes, the man pushing himself away from the shinobi in front of him as he did so. You know it's not nice to throw things at people's faces? Very rude, what would your mother think? A teasing voice spoke out, cutting through the crackling sound of the flaming buildings as it did so. All eyes turned in the direction of the voice, the shinobi tensing and pulling out kunai as they tried to pinpoint exactly where it came from. Naruto found it instantly, feeling the chakra of the speaker and seeing the strong blue outline around their figure, locking his eyes onto the top of one of the burning buildings as he focused in on the source of the voice. There stood, even as the flames under his feet slowly crawled closer, was a boy. He looked a couple of years older than Naruto, probably in his early teens. He had dull gray hair that fell to just above his eyes, both of which were covered by a pair of round glasses that caught the light in such a way that it made them shine in the darkness of the night, the shine having a secondary effect of also hiding his eyes from sight. What was visible, however, was the largest grin Naruto had probably ever seen, that was spread across his face. It was so large it looked painful to Naruto, and clenched between the boy's teeth was an unlit cigarette. He was a little pale, but not overly so, and Naruto could clearly see several scars running along his face, with the stitches still being present in his skin. His frame, while not as skinny as Naruto's, was still quite slim. He was wearing a gray and brown patchwork shirt which seemed to cling to his chest like it was a second skin. His pants were in a similar state, but probably not as skin tight. Then there was the odd white lab coat he wore over the top. The coat looked several sizes too big for the boy, with the sleeves falling well past his hands and the bottom bunching slightly at his feet. To finish off his strange appearance, he also had for some reason or another a shovel strapped to his back, and narrowing his eyes slightly to focus, and Naruto could see that fresh dirt still covered it. Overall, he made quite an unusual sight. To Naruto, the boy looked quite deranged. However, as soon as Naruto finished taking in his appearance, he also noticed the boy's outstretched arm with the sleeve pulled up so that his hand was visible. Said hand held with the fingers spread out wide, with the tips bent slightly. The hand was a pale white color, and had scars covering it, and just like the ones on his face, they still had the sticks in. It was while he was looking at the boy's hand that Naruto saw it, the light from the flames catching something and making it shine slightly in the dark night. Wire? No, it was too thin even for ninja wire. Whatever it was made up of hundreds of threads of string, each of which were shooting in every direction all over the burning settlement, the threads covering the area like a spider's web, and they all seemed to be connected to the boy's outstretched hand. It was almost like a spider's web, which would make the shinobi the flies that were trapped in the middle of it, with no apparent way out. The reason the kunai had stopped in midair was that it had somehow gotten tangled in the strings, and was for some reason unable to cut through the wire, which would lead Naruto to believe that whatever they were stronger than they looked. Naruto saw the moment that the shinobi noticed the strings too, and the one that had been smirking before suddenly didn't look so confident now. It was like the look of a man who had wielded power temporarily, only to realize he wasn't the biggest fish in the sea. The unnamed boy suddenly leapt from the very top of the burning building he was stood on, allowing himself to drop so he was instead sitting on the edge of the roof, the strings shifting with his movement. Aha! And somehow that sudden movement had caused one of the shinobi to lose his leg, while another of the shinobi lost his hand and a third his head. It was quite a show to the watching Naruto, who with his enhanced vision was able to see the strings moving in the darkness, and how easily they seemed to cut through the flesh of the enemy shinobi. This left 8 shinobi who were still able to function at 100%, all of which now looked very worried and very pissed off. The same one that had been speaking before slowly turned to face the boy, getting a cut on his cheek for his trouble. "You little shit! You know you will never get away with this. He will just send more, you will never escape," the man shouted out, the arrogance that had been previously present fading to reveal a note of fear and anxiety in his voice. In response to the man's threat, the boy showed absolutely no sign of caring. Instead, all he did was lean back so his head was next to a flame, which with a slight tilt of his head he used to light his cigarette without taking it out of his mouth. "You talk a lot, don't you? I can fix that if you want. I always wondered what it would be like to remove someone's voice box. I know most go for the tongue, but let's face it, after so many years of it being the first choice, it is kind of a bit boring," was the boy's nonchalant response, a cloud of smoke leaving his mouth as he spoke, the wispy white smoke being swiftly overwhelmed by the great billowing black smoke that was coming off of the burning buildings. Then with a twitch of his middle finger 2 more of the shinobi fell, one losing his feet and falling into other and getting sliced into pieces, while the other was simply cut in half at his waist. The boy still showed no sign of caring, and the grin was still in place as he took a deep puff before leaning his head back and letting the smoke in a thick stream. When he turned to face the man again, he got a thoughtful expression on his face, the grin slipping for a moment as he took on a serious look and hummed to himself. "You know, I actually think I have a better plan for you." A twitch of his index finger, this time only one being killed as the top of his head fell off. "After all, I could always use a few more parts." Another twitch, another 2 dead. "And it's so hard to find volunteers." twitch, and now only the shinobi who had been speaking was left, looking like he was going to make a run for it any second now. But before he could, there was another twitch, only this time instead of cutting the man into pieces, the strings wrapped around his body. They dug in deep, leaving lines all over his skin, but didn't cut. The shinobi was spluttering as he took in deep, gasping breaths now, eyes wide in panic as he found he was unable to move an inch. He was, however, able to speak. "Damn you, Frankenstein, damn you to hell." The now named Frankenstein just tilted his head to the side and gave a small smile, uncaring for the man's curses. Where would be the fun in that? And with a final twitch, the last shinobi fell to pieces on the ground. With Naruto. As the enemy shinobi fell to the floor, the now named Frankenstein reeled in his strings. As he did so, he showed that he had a strange arm brace on his wrists. It was odd looking, as it had spools of string attached that Naruto didn't notice before. Looking around the burning settlement, Naruto noticed that the loggers and their families were fleeing into the woods, using the distraction caused by Frankenstein to their advantage as they ran away. They didn't even look back as the odd boy in the lab coat waved them off with a large smile on his face. They seemed just as afraid of him as they were the shinobi he had just killed, maybe even more. Naruto stayed on his branch, choosing to watch and wait, which paid off, as the moment the last of the villagers were out of sight, Frankenstein jumped down from his perch on the burning roof and started whistling as he walked over to the dead and dismembered shinobi. The boy was so casual about the whole thing that he even had his hands in his pockets as he whistled, showing nothing but carefree indifference to the massacre he had just caused. However, it was after looking at what was left of the shinobi that Naruto saw them, all 11 of them floating about 2 feet off the ground. Souls, but unlike any he had seen before while feeding from the various animals that populated Konoham, animals that were not limited to birds, dogs, foxes, and cats. Each of the soul's orbs were almost completely black except for a few blue spots here and there, and the glowing white centers of the orbs. Thinking back, Naruto remembered what you had told him about souls. He had said that the souls could go to one of 2 places. They could either go to the pure world or the impure world, depending on the purity of the soul. He had also said that a tainted soul would be obvious, as when a soul is revealed that the darkness cannot be hidden. This meant that these shinobi must have been very bad to have such black souls. Naruto felt the saliva pooling in his mouth at the sight of them, his stomach giving a low growl. It took all his self-restraint to not just jump down there and devour them, so great was the urge that his grip on the tree branch he was perched on started leaving slight indents. Naruto's eyes flashed from the souls to the other boy in the clearing, who, as Naruto watched, seemed to have started digging through the different body parts strewn across the clearing. Naruto pulled his bag off his back and dug around until he found his recently finished mask. He had at least finished carving and painting it. However, he still planned to add a few seals when he had understood and learned enough not to have it blow up in his face, literally. The mask was actually in 2 parts. One part covered the lower half of his face, while the other covered the top half. They were made to look like a slightly demonic skull, with large teeth and sharp features, though whether it came across that way was debatable. After all, he was only 10 and was hardly an expert craftsman. The 2 parts were separated at the mouth so that he could open it, and curved so it covered the sides of his face. It stopped just at his hairline. Most of the mask was painted black, with the exception of 2 white lines going down the mask from the top to the bottom, cutting through each of the eye holes. Overall, it was quite a shoddy job, and definitely looked like it had been done by a child. Fortunately, though it did its job, it hid his identity. When he placed the mask on his face, Naruto used a bit of his chakra to keep it held in place, leaving only the blue of his eyes visible through the mask's eye holes. He then made sure his hood was up and covering his hair. After assuring himself that both his features and hair were covered, he jumped down from his tree and slowly walking towards where the souls were floating above the fallen shinobi's bodies. His approach was almost like a predatory prowl as he kept low to the ground, ready to bolt at any moment. As while the other boy in the clearing had his back turned to him, Naruto had just seen him dispatch a number of trained shinobi. Sure, they were probably quite weak, but they were still probably stronger than Naruto currently was. Being careful not to make a sound, Naruto slowly walked over to the first soul and reached out for it, coating his hand in his unique chakra as he did so that he could grab it. You had told him that for the more powerful soul he would need to use a small amount of his chakra to be able to make physical contact with it. The weaker animal souls he had dealt with so far had needed nothing more than the passive chakra he had running through his body for him to pick them up. You had told him that a more powerful a soul was, the more likely it was to try and fight him if he went to take it, and therefore to better exert his control, and he should use chakra. His fingers had just brushed against the first soul orb when he felt something tapping his shoulder. Turning around, his hand going for the sheathed knife at his hip, Naruto was completely knocked off balance by what was said next. "Hey you, which of these do you think look healthier?" Startled, Naruto jumped back, turning and facing the boy talking to him, his knife out, and held in a guard position, not that it turned out to be really necessary. As the boy before him barely blinked at Naruto's actions, instead Naruto found two hands held in front of his face, each of which was holding some kind of organ. How had he not felt him walking up behind him? He felt anything and everything that was alive. These were the thoughts that were running through Naruto's head as the boy in the lab coat continued to wave his organ-filled hands in the blonde's face. Naruto, instead of looking at the organs that were still dripping blood, instead looked up at the person holding them, his eyes coming to rest on the smiling face of Frankenstein. The boy seemed to care very little for Naruto's sudden appearance, as he instead seemed more concerned with weighing the two organs in his hands. It was also at this point that Naruto got his first clear view of the boy's eyes behind his glasses, which as he looked closely turned out to be a golden yellow color. It's so hard to find healthy kidneys, you know. Usually they get poisoned with sake or rotten, no use at all. But these don't look too bad, do they? No, they look quite good actually. I think I will keep them for later. Lungs, on the other hand, well, you wouldn't believe how many of those I go through. I'm actually thinking of replacing the ones I'm using at the moment. They're getting a little worn out. The boy said casually as he now looked away from Naruto and instead focused on the now identified kidneys in his hands. Unable to think of anything to say to that statement, Naruto could only watch as the boy walked over to a growing pile of organs and placed the kidneys on top. He also saw another pile made up of limbs next to it, and a final pile which was made up of decapitated heads. Swallowing his shock as he watched Frankenstein walk over to one of the other bodies in the clearing, pulling a scalpel out of his sleeve as he did so, Naruto finally came back to his senses. Standing up from his defensive crouch, he instead gave the boy a confused look, his knife still in hand but no longer pointed at the boy. What are you doing?" Naruto said a bit shakily at first before pulling himself together as he overcame his shock. "Recycling. I rarely get to pick through stuff this fresh, not an ounce of rot or a single worm. These lungs look good enough for now," was the nonchalant response he received. Naruto watched as with a hard tug, the clearly insane boy pulled out the lungs from one of the dead shinobi's chests and held it up as he examined them, a cheerful smile on his face all the while. "What?" Naruto asked blankly. "Just 1 second." Without another word, Frankenstein stood up and took off his baggy lab coat, with his shirt soon following. Naruto could only stare at the multiple scars present on the boy's body, making the boy's skin look more patchwork than his clothes. He also had a pair of bolts sticking out the sides of his neck. However, when Frankenstein used the scalpel to cut the stitches along a particularly large scar across his chest, he revealed that it wasn't a scar at all. It was an unhealed wound of some kind, and Naruto felt his legs give out from under him again when Frankenstein actually shoved his own hand inside the cut. He seemed to be moving it around randomly for about 10 seconds, and in all that time all Naruto could think about was the lack of blood. Finally the boy seemed to find what he was looking. Before he did anything else though, he looked back to Naruto with a bored expression on his face. "If you're squeamish you might want to look away, this is about to get very graphic very fast." Before Naruto even had time to blink, Frankenstein gave a sharp tug, and slowly pulled out his own lungs. The moment they were free of his chest, the boy dropped them and quickly shoved the lungs he had taken from the dead shinobi into his chest as a replacement. After that he quickly put the other hand in his chest too. Then, much to Naruto's growing shock, he started talking again, his voice now slightly wheezy. "You know, you never really notice how much you breathe until you don't have a pair of lungs. It's very uncomfortable." 5 minutes of fiddling around in his own chest, and suddenly he took a deep gasping breath. For that moment, Naruto saw him lose his casual attitude, only for it to return a second later, along with his insane grin, which one again spread across his face. "Woo! Nothing like a new organ to get the heart pumping. Wait, nope, that one's okay for now." Giving a shake with his whole body, Frankenstein pulled the string from one of the spools attached to his bracer. It was at that point Naruto noticed several things he had not before, such as the fact the bracer seemed to be bolted onto the arm, the metal rivets driven right into the skin. Then there was the fact that at the end of each spool of string there was what looked like a sewing needle attached. With practiced ease, Frankenstein resewed his own chest back up, the gaping wound becoming just one of the many stitched wounds that covered his body. When he had finished, Frankenstein used his scalpel to cut the thread, leaving the wound fully stitched. Naruto wanted to be sick, he really did. But it just wasn't coming up, and he was forced to put up with the turning in his stomach as the boy went back to sorting through the dead. However, when he saw Frankenstein's attention land on the soul he had been planning to eat, he quickly pulled himself together enough to stand and move over just as the gray-haired boy started trying to poke it. It turned out when Naruto's chakra makes contact with the soul, it causes it to become fully visible to everyone. Naruto made a quick note of that as he tried to wave the other boy off from touching his prize. He seemed to find the fact his finger passed through it very amusing, as he continued to poke it in vain. "What the hell is this? Did you make this?" It looks like a floating mass of chakra, Frankenstein said in delighted curiosity, as his hand once again broke past Naruto's guard only for it to pass through the glowing orb. Licking his lips being the teeth of his mask, Naruto made an effort to turn away from the soul and instead to the clearly insane boy that he had just seen replace his own lungs. What the hell are you? Naruto asked as he gave up on trying to stop the bigger boy from touching the soul and instead tried to distract him. Turning away with his finger still stuck in the soul, Frankenstein seemed to get a slightly confused face for a moment before he seemed to realize something and slapped himself in the forehead as he turned to face Naruto completely. His attention now entirely on Naruto as opposed to the soul orb. Of course, where are my manners? My name is Victor Frankenstein, at least that's the name I was given. Then again, I guess all names are given by someone. What was I talking about? Oh right, I remember now. I was named after my great-great-great-great-grandfather, who was some important guy back in the day or something. Though I am also known as the grave robber, on account of me recycling bodies. I mean, burying them in the ground is just such a waste. You know, I once found a perfectly good stomach and spinal cord in the same grave. And they say I'm mad, the boy said before throwing his head back and letting out a mad laugh. As he heard Victor's introduction, Naruto's eyes started twitching behind his mask, an action he expected would be happening a lot over the next few hours. It didn't help that as he was talking, Victor had offered him a hand to shake. Only the hand wasn't actually his but instead was a part of a severed arm he had picked up. Though he did wish they weren't still standing in a burning village surrounded by dead bodies, but the odd boy didn't seem to care at all. They spent the next hour talking as Victor sorted the different body parts into piles, going off on random tangents every now and then in the middle of talking about something else. With Naruto occasionally grabbing one of the souls of the fallen shinobi when the boy's back was turned, shoving it in his mouth quickly and ignoring the surge of energy he received and the number of flashing images. Taking note that he would have to go into his mindscape later and with you help look through whatever scraps of memory he had absorbed to see if there was anything useful. It turned out that Victor was one of the last members of a clan who were all in hiding and had been for decades. They had apparently been very well known before the hidden villages were formed. The clan had slowly started to die out after the formation of the shinobi villages, though that was mainly because no one had wanted them to join their village as they were being formed. While rare, there had been several clans that either chose not to join any of the villages, or simply weren't allowed. The majority of these clans had died out many years ago, or dropped off the map altogether. Clans such as these had been named rogue clans. The Frankenstein clan was a clan of medical ninja of a sort. Victor's ancestor discovered a way to separate his chakra network from his physical body, while still being able to use both. This led to what had been called the living corpse jutsu, allowing them to become, for lack of a better word, zombies. As long as they had chakra, they could live with almost any damage, though if they ran out before things were replaced, they would die. There was more to it than that and other related jutsu that were developed by the clan, but Naruto didn't ask for more details. He didn't really want to. The clan was technically speaking a clan of immortals. They grew to maturity, but when they did so they stopped getting older when they reached their peak. They did start to rot though the older they got, which meant that as long as they had constantly had chakra and regularly replaced their organs, they could live indefinitely. They also had no sense of pain, which was no doubt adapted by them to make the process of replacing their body parts easier. A fallback of their bloodline though were that they couldn't heal naturally. However, their inability to heal and the tendency to rot was counteracted by the ability to replace old and damaged body parts with what they recycled from the dead, which was the main reason they were not welcome when the hidden villages were being formed. During the time of the clan wars, the Frankenstein clan became infamous for their medical skills and questionable methods. However, after the hidden villages had been formed and the clan wars ended, they had lost their recyclable material. They were forced to start grave robbing for body parts, which only made others more uncomfortable around them. Things had gotten better during the Great Shinobi Wars, but each time there was peace their numbers had continued to lower to the point of near extinction. Naruto found himself feeling sorry for the older boy. Almost his whole clan was either dead or in hiding, and he was forced to scavenge from the dead just to survive. Though it wasn't just the Frankenstein clan that had been forced to become a rogue clan, Naruto remembered a book he had once read which had mentioned several. There were also several he knew that could be considered, if not worse, on equal footing as the Frankenstein clan when it came to unsavory jutsu. Then there were the shinobi from before. Naruto had heard his father talking about the newly formed Hidden Sound Village, though not much was known. It turned out that the self-proclaimed Otokage had taken an interest in the Frankenstein clan and their inherited abilities, and had been sending teams to try and invite Victor to the village. Apparently they were all little more than cannon fodder and scrap parts, as Victor liked to call them. It turned out that the string trap he had set up was actually not as impressive as it looked. Those shinobi had just been incompetent. All they had to do was charge their kunai with chakra and they would have been able to cut through the wires with ease, and if they had any brains they wouldn't have walked into the trap in the first place, which had apparently taken the boy hours to set up after he had left a trail for them to follow to the village. Naruto wasn't sure how he felt about Victor using the loggers and their families as a distraction, but at least he had stopped any of them from being killed. A few days out of Konoha and already he was finding out that the world was a much harsher place than he had ever imagined while living in the sheltered Uzumaki compound. By the time Victor had finished talking about himself, the boy giving Naruto the feeling he was lonely, which was why he was being so open so he could continue talking to Naruto, all of the piles of body parts had been sealed in separate scrolls, leaving nothing but the 4 remaining souls floating in the air. Most of the houses had been mostly burnt down by this point, though the flames were still going strong from the collapsed timber. Naruto didn't miss the fact that the 4 remaining souls that he hadn't gotten around to eating yet looked smaller than before, and were starting to fade slightly. "So I told you all the dirty details, now what's your story?" Victor asked, looking intently at Naruto now, no longer distracted by his macabre activities. Licking his lips, Naruto paused for a moment to think about what exactly to say. He couldn't tell him the truth. The main reason he had left home in the first place was so people didn't find out what he was and what he could do. Thinking quickly, Naruto gave a small shrug before he walked over to the nearest soul, one of the few remaining ones that he hadn't been able to subtle consume when Victor's back was turned. Something that appeared to have been done in vain, as there were still souls present, and he was still hungry. "I gained a newly unlocked bloodline, first in my family to ever possess it. Didn't like the idea of being turned into breeding stock or a weapon, so I did a runner," was Naruto's abrupt answer to the boy, as he chose to rely on half-truths. The soul was cold to the touch and about the size of an apple now that it had shrunk. "Really? So what's your thing? I met this guy from one clan once that could turn his entire body into water, which was really cool," Victor said enthusiastically as he continued to watch Naruto intently, looking for any indications of what this mysterious bloodline could be. Turning back around to face Victor with the soul still in his hand, Naruto smirked behind his mask at the surprised look on his face before lifting the soul to his mouth. This was the reason he made it so his mask was in 2 parts. He hesitated for all of a second, suddenly unsure if this was the right thing to do, to reveal his ability in the form of a bloodline so blatantly, but then the growling of his stomach decided it for him. Opening his mouth impossibly wide, Naruto put the soul into his mouth at once and swallowed it whole. Once again he felt the adrenaline rush like nothing he had ever felt before exploding inside his body, filling him with energy and washing away all the aches and pains after having tree jumped for so long. He felt his own chakra more than double, straining slightly at his core before it grew to accommodate the added chakra. Eating this soul was just as intense of the other ones he had eaten. It was so different to the animal souls he had eaten before. Rolling his head on his shoulders and making the joints click loudly, Naruto turned back to Victor with a smirk hidden behind his mask. Victor gave a low whistle, scratching his head with a small frown on his lips, as he seemed to be trying to understand what had just happened. However, when Naruto moved on to the next soul, making it visible as he grabbed it with his chakra, he seemed to slowly start to understand when he looked at the bloodstains on the ground under the soul. "Are those what I think they are?" Shrugging as he another of the remaining souls, Naruto rubbed his jaw slightly to ease the ache that was starting before speaking as he grabbed the next. "Depends. If you think they are the souls of the shinobi you just killed, then yes. I can not only see them after something dies, but my chakra allows me to touch them, and when I eat one the chakra is added to my own. My body needs a mixed diet of both souls and normal food to survive, which is why," Naruto began, outline a very rough summary of his bloodline. It was only fair after all, Victor had told him his, and so Naruto would reveal his own. Of course he wouldn't reveal everything. After all, it is easier to get away with half-truths than lies. "You're so skinny. Let me guess, you didn't start seeing souls until after you unlocked your chakra, meaning you were starving?" Naruto had to give it to the boy. He was smarter than he looked and acted and sounded. He also seemed to be very indifferent to the fact that Naruto was eating human souls, though Victor seemed to understand his silence and gave a shrug. "Dude, I'm a freaking grave-robbing nutjob. You eating souls is not a big deal. Though I doubt you would have been used as breeding stock wherever you came from, because a skill like that is more suited to a rogue clan. You, my friend, as far as most people are concerned, are little more than a parasite that needs to feed off of other people to survive. That's how most of us ended up becoming rogue clans after the end of the clan wars. Just another outcast, or as the proper shinobi and villages call us, Lonin." The way he said Lonin, Naruto knew that Victor didn't think much of the title. Naruto had never even thought about it like that, but Victor was right. Would his family have thought the same, thought less of him because he needed to eat souls to survive? Before Naruto would have said that yes, they would have accepted him without a doubt. Now though, after having found out they had lied and misled him for his entire life, he was not so sure. But one thing he knew was that the rest of the Hidden Leaf would not have accepted his existence. Suddenly his plan to run away to Whirlpool sounded better, while at the same time not as well thought out as Naruto had first thought. Where would he find souls? Sure, animals kept him fed, but they didn't make him strong. He needed to be strong for when people eventually found out what he really was, when they would come for him. After all, was that not his original plan? To get so strong he would never have to feel scared or weak again. His hand hesitated as he reached for the last soul, suddenly unsure with what he was going to do. Until Victor spoke again. So are you heading to Water Country too? His question was quite simple, but all the same it threw Naruto for a loop. Blinking, Naruto turned away from the soul and back to Victor, only to deadpan when he saw the boy wasn't even paying attention. Instead he was just picking his nose. What? The land of water you going? With the hidden mist civil war going on, it's the perfect place for outcasts like us. More people killing each other than people ever bother to count, and there is always work in war for people like us with special skills. So you going? Victor asked again, a grin on his face. Naruto turned back to the last soul and held it in his hand for a moment, before giving a silent nod and swallowing it. Yeah, I guess so. Great. We can go together. By the way, what is with that stupid mask? It is to hide my identity. Oh, okay, so are you any good at digging? It was as Naruto and Victor were shoveling the last bits of dirt upon the mutilated remains of the sound shinobi that Naruto felt something. It was like a strange itch on the back of his neck. Turning and looking around, Naruto's eyes scanned the dark trees that surrounded him, looking for anything that could have caused the feeling. As he looked around, his enhanced sight allowed him to see through the night like it was day, but this enhancement did not allow him to look through trees. Deciding to try something else out, Naruto drew on his sensing abilities. Although he did not that they be as good as Mito's sensory abilities, Naruto's had a unique trait to them. Searching the surrounding area with his abilities, he soon found the source of his discomfort. Sitting roughly 20 meters back from the tree line was the figure of another person. To Naruto's, the person stuck out from the rest of his surroundings, his figure a blazing light compared to the rest of the dull and grayish landscape. The reason the man stuck out so much despite trying to suppress his chakra was due to the nature of Naruto's sensory ability. He did not sense chakra like a normal sensory shinobi, instead he sensed life force. Unfortunately though, something about his stance must have alerted the observer that he had been spotted, as without any warning they started leaping through the trees in the direction of Naruto and Victor. It took the shinobi barely a few seconds to cross the distance and leap at Victor, a kunai in hand, as he shot towards his unwary prey. It all happened so fast for Naruto. 1 second he had spotted an enemy shinobi hiding in the background, observing the two of them. The next second he could see a blur-like figure bursting out of the surrounding trees and heading for his newly made friend Victor. It was as this was all happening that Naruto's adrenaline surged. His recently increased reserves of chakra roaring to life, Naruto unconsciously started drawing on the chakra of the souls he had consumed. The energy flooding his limbs as Naruto lunged forward, heading to intercept the enemy shinobi as they closed in on Victor, who only now was turning around. As he moved, Naruto felt his every sense flaring. The scent of blood and smoke in the air was stifling, the sound of his feet crunching against the forest floor. As he moved, his eyes caught a glint of metal on the floor. It was an axe, no doubt dropped by one of the loggers when they were attacked. Taking a few steps forward, his body thrumming with energy, Naruto leant down and scooped up the axe from the floor, the overabundant chakra running through his body, now pouring from his hands in a bluish-gray wave as Naruto unconsciously channeled it into the axe he was wielding. Another step and he had somehow caught up to the enemy, the person who had once been a blur, coming into focus as Naruto approached. His axe already swinging through the air, even as the now revealed man lunged forward with his kunai, the metal forehead the man wore glinting in the firelight, as it revealed the symbol of the Sound Village. Crunch! With a dull crunching sound, Naruto's axe made contact with the shinobi, the blade of the axe connecting where the man's neck met his shoulder. The chakra-infused blade cutting through muscle, skin and bone like a hot knife through butter. To Naruto's enhanced sight, he could see how the flesh seemed to go gray and shrivel as the axe made contact, not that it really mattered as blade continued its path and sliced through the man's body, bursting out the other side in a shower of gore. Falling onto his knees, Naruto started panting. It had been barely 5 seconds since Naruto had identified the enemy, but somehow he felt as if it had been an hour. His heart thundered in his chest even as his entire body began shaking. Looking up, he could see the vacant look in the gaze of the man he had just killed. Holding back a retch, Naruto could already see the orb of light that represented his soul beginning to rise into the air above the man's slain body. "Ah, that's sweet, you brought desert." Looking up as he heard the voice, Naruto saw Victor stood above him, the boy already twirling the scalpel in his hand as he looked down at the dead body in front of him. An assessing look on his face as he inspected the dead shinobi's remains. Did you have to make such a mess though? I mean, you probably ruined his heart and lungs. You, my friend, need some practice. Looking at Victor, a disbelieving expression on his masked face, Naruto couldn't help but let loose a bark of laughter. The boy had come close to death, and yet he was so nonchalant about it. To Naruto it was absolutely absurd. Looking down, Naruto again looked at the dead body of the shinobi before turning his gaze instead to the woodcutter's axe he had picked up. The metal axe head was still in perfect condition, but the wooden handle was covered in splinters and cracks. It looked like it could fall apart at any second. I think I broke my axe, Naruto said blandly before turning his gaze back to Victor. The boy merely looking at him with an amused expression for some reason. We'll get you a new one. Now hurry up and eat your dessert like a good boy, as I am in the market for a spare liver. With Kushina. Kushina sat silently on the bed in Naruto's room, her eyes red from crying and her throat raw. The sound of heavy rain hitting the now closed window and strong wind made the only noise in the room, one of the Land of Fire's rare storms having hit the village an hour ago. She felt sick and tired both, physically and emotionally. But no matter how hard she tried, Kushina couldn't sleep, not while her son was missing. They had been unable to get permission from the daimyo of the Land of Rice, though not for lack of trying. The problem was that unless they gave their reason for wanting to cross the border, they would not be allowed, but if word that Naruto had been taken got out, there would be chaos. Even with his condition, Naruto was still the son of the Hokage, not to mention one of the very few Uzumaki left in existence. The moment it became known to other villages that he was taken, there would be a mad scramble to find him, so Minato had to be very careful with who knew. This unfortunately didn't include the daimyo of a country allied with the Hidden Rock, who were the last people they wanted to find out. But now they had no leads, no trail, and no way to track him. Even now the storm washed away what few traces of his presence that were probably still around. Even if they were allowed to cross the border now, the trail would have gone cold, leaving nothing for them to follow. Their only hope now was, as much as she hated it at the moment, Jiraiya. Unfortunately, they needed to wait for him to return to the village, the old pervert having left after the triplets' birthday, after Kushina had asked him to leave with her foot and a few well-thrown kunai. Minato had sent a messenger hawk with a letter calling him back to the village the moment they returned after hitting the border, but he didn't go into any details in the message in case it was intercepted by hostiles. But it depended on where he was in the elemental nations at the moment, just how long it would take for the message to get to him, along how long it would take him to get back. 2 weeks was a long time for someone like Jiraiya, and he could cover a lot of ground in that. Though Minato had used one of their codes to stress the urgency of the situation, so when he did get the message, the old pervert would no doubt come running as fast as he could to see what the problem was. Letting out a tired sigh, Kushina stood up and walked over to Naruto's desk, her hand gentle over the top as another tear fell from the corner of her eye. However, before she could start crying again, something caught her eye. One of the drawers on the desk was partly open, just enough for her to see that it was empty. Wiping the tear from her face, Kushina pulled the drawer out completely and felt around the back to make sure, still finding nothing before moving on to a different drawer. All of them were empty. Feeling a hard lump start to form in her stomach, Kushina slowly walked over to the dresser on the other side of the room. Her hands shaking, she grabbed the handle and pulled it open. Nothing. This wasn't right. Kidnappers don't waste time packing. They didn't give the person they were kidnapping time to grab a change of clothes, or other things. Widening as a new thought occurred to her, Kushina quickly had to grab the dresser for balance when she was hit with a dizzy spell. The edges of her vision were starting to go black as her head continued to spin with the new realization, but before she could even fully think the words through in her head, the world faded completely, and Kushina fell to the floor in a faint. With Naruto. Naruto and Victor took shelter from the storm in the hollow of one of the giant trees in the forest, the pair having long left the loggers' outpost behind them. A large billowing cloud of smoke and a single large mound that covered the site of a mass burial, being the only things left that would signify what had happened. Not that many people would ever look into it, it would instead be just written off as a bandit attack gone wrong. Naruto had been more than a little disturbed when Victor hid the scroll containing the spare parts he had collected inside his own body. Literally. The boy had undone one of the sticks on his stomach and put the scroll inside before sewing it back up again, as if nothing had happened. The two of them stayed in the hollow tree until the worst of the storm had passed, at least for the moment, and got a few hours of sleep. Naruto had not taken his mask off since he had met Victor, despite the boy mocking it several times, and while he doubted the boy would recognize him even if he did take it off, he had no intention of removing it anytime soon. In fact, Naruto decided that the only time he was going to remove it was when he started adding the seals he wanted to add to it, which meant he had to first learn Fuinjutsu properly. Though thinking about how long that might take, he was considering replacing the mask with something more convenient. But for the moment, although his blonde hair was a bit unusual, it was nothing compared to the birthmarks on his face. Those were traits that only 3 people were known to have, and all it would take is someone mentioning seeing a blonde boy with whisker-like birthmarks, and all of Naruto's efforts would have been for nothing. But having left the shelter of the tree hours ago, the 2 boys now found themselves soaked to the bone, Victor's hair plastered to his head and glasses steamed up to the point he was forced to take them off every few minutes to clean them. Naruto was spared the worst of it by his hood, which had not come down since they had started walking again. While it would have been faster to travel by tree jumping for Naruto, Victor was not as familiar with the method, him not being a native of Konoha, and the heavy rain posed the increased possibility of slipping. Because of this and the fact Naruto had already put enough distance between himself and the village, especially now that the rain was washing away his trail, the 2 boys were now quite comfortably walking at a steady pace in the direction of the land of water. So you said you are the first of your family to get this bloodline right, so that must mean you are working from scratch? Victor asked, a note of curiosity in his voice as he spoke to the younger boy. Turning to look at Victor out of the corner of his eyes, Naruto took a moment to notice that other than needing to clean his glasses, Victor didn't seem at all bothered by the rain in the slightest before answering. Basically, though I have been able to work out a few things by myself though. A friend gave me a scroll with the basics of hand seals and how they work. His words seemed to bring another grin to Victor's face, and Naruto was forced to stop when the older boy grabbed his arm and pulled him to a spot under a tree the rain wasn't able to get past. I have got to see this, show me what you got. Licking his lips as he thought about whether or not he should show him, Naruto decided to give in to his childish side and show off a little. After all, having been looked down on his entire life, he thought he was owed a bit of adulation. So with a mental shrug and a slight smile, he started going through hand seals. Soul release, animal spirit summoning jutsu. Naruto took a deep breath while making the seals, before letting it out with a dark bluish-gray mass of chakra that looked a lot more like smoke than when he had first started to create the jutsu. He kept breathing out as the smoke swirled around in the air in front of him, before it slowly started to drift to the floor. He watched with a smirk behind his mask as the smoke-like chakra started to take the form of a fox with purple eyes. Victor watched Naruto's actions, a rare serious expression on his face as he crouched down to get a closer look of the ghost-like fox the blonde had just summoned. Only for the expression to quickly fade as he burst out laughing, another large grin returning to his lips as he leaned back on his heels. Taking offense to his new friend's reaction, Naruto was about to complain before Victor stood back up and turned his grin on him, patting him on the shoulder as he did so. You, my friend, will be one of the most feared shinobi in the elemental nations. Naruto was stunned for a moment, and much to his shame when he tried to speak it came out in a slight stutter. What? Victor was once again crouched down in front of his spirit by this point, one hand slowly reaching out to poke it. You think I can't see what this is? I watched you eat a load of souls, and probably missed you eating a load more, remember? You just coughed up the soul of a fox, so I can only assume that at some point you ate the soul of that fox, meaning you keep some kind of imprint of the soul's original form after you consumed it. If this holds true to human souls too, then who knows the full extent of just what you can do. Hell, you might even be able to absorb. Ouch. What the hell? Victor was cut off mid-sentence when his finger finally made contact with the fox spirit, only to pass through as if it really was made of smoke. However, that wasn't the only thing that happened, as became apparent when the older boy pulled back his hand and looked at his finger. The skin that had come into contact with the spirit had turned dark gray, and much to Naruto's shock looked to be rotting away very quickly. Victor showed little care as he pulled out a scalpel and cut the finger off of his hand, the digit falling to the floor at his feet. They watched in silence for a moment as the gray skin continued to rot away for a moment, before turning to each other with odd looks on their faces. Naruto was confused, having not seen such a reaction before. But he had never used the jutsu for anything but practice, so there were clearly more for him to learn. Victor, on the other hand, instead of looking upset about losing a finger, was only grinning wider as he pulled a new one out of one of the pockets of his coat and started to sew it onto his hand. You really are full of surprises, you know I never actually got a name off of you. Naruto absently dispelled the spirit with a wave of his hand, taking a moment to consider what to say. He couldn't tell Victor his real name. It would defeat the point of wearing a mask after all. But at the same time, the older boy needed something to address him by, didn't he? Apparently seeing his conflict despite him wearing a mask, Victor gave a small shrug and folded his arms behind his head casually. Hey, don't worry about it, I figure if you are still wearing that crappy mask you don't want your real name getting around either. How about a nickname then? Naruto gave a relieved sigh, grateful for his new friend's understanding, and gave a small nod. Victor's lips formed a smile that only bordered on a grin, holding his chin in a thinking pose as he seemed to consider what to call him before clicking his fingers. I've got it, I'll call you Ghosty. Naruto gave him a deadpan look that could be both seen and felt through his mask, before shaking his head and walking back out into the rain. Victor followed a moment later, his hand once again on his chin. No? Okay, how about Deadly McDeadface? Corpse Breath? Soul Sucker? This continued for the next hour, until Naruto finally had enough and sucker punched Victor in the stomach to shut him up. They never did settle on a name by the end of it though. With Naruto made sure to pull his hood lower as they approached the small port settlement. This was both to cover his hair and to hide his masked face. While the mask couldn't be linked to him like could his hair, it would still put people on edge. Plus he was tired of all the mocking he was receiving from Victor about it. Yes, the workmanship wasn't the greatest, but he was only 10, so give him some credit. When it came to unnerving people though, he really shouldn't have bothered. After all, Victor did enough of that for the both of them, what with his scarred features and the insanely large grin spread across his face. It had taken them just over 2 days to reach the ocean from when they had left the loggers' settlement, though they did waste another 5 hours searching for the small port village they now found themselves at. The both of them drew more than a few odd looks as they walked down the road towards the docks, passing the small hut-like buildings that made up the settlement as they did so, though no one seemed bothered enough to actually approach them. Between Victor's scars and Naruto's dark hooded clothing, they could pass for ninja even if they were young. It was fortunate really that most civilians never looked too deeply where shinobi were concerned. Naruto was forced to drag Victor away from a few stores as they passed, the older boy taking a ridiculous amount of time to examine their wares, though to be honest Naruto believed he just did that to piss him off. At one point he had needed to use both hands to pull Bizarre Boy away from a butcher's shop that had several whole animals hanging from hooks in the window. What Victor wanted with the dead bodies of animals Naruto really didn't want to know, though the fact that he was salivating when he looked at them was very unnerving. The port village was tiny when compared to the Hidden Leaf and wasn't even half the size, so even with Victor being a pain in the arse they got to the docks in under an hour. Though it was a struggle at one point, the streets were quite narrow after all and there seemed to be a lot of people in the town. Turns out there was market in village today. The smell of fish was heavy in the air, along with the smell from the recently returned and unwashed fishermen who had caught them. Victor looked like he didn't even notice while Naruto was trying not to be sick, but considering the older boy's habit of digging up graves it wasn't that much of a surprise that the stench of dead fish didn't bother him. However, after they got to the dock they came to realize that the hard part of their journey had only just begun. They had to find someone willing to take them to the war zone that was the land of water. It turns out a lot of people were a little put off by the Civil War, and had been avoiding it for the most part ever since it began a few months ago, not that Naruto could blame them. Supply ships had a tendency to be attacked and raided by both the Hidden Mist and Rebellion, though the crew was rarely if ever harmed when they were attacked. The loss of income from their wares was still a harsh blow to the captains and investors. This made offering to work on a supply ship for passage no use at all, because no one was stupid enough to even get near the land of water. Fishing ships were also a dead end, most being too small to go that far away from the mainland. The few that were large enough to make the trip had set courses and none of them came even close to the land of water. In the end, after hours of searching and asking around, Naruto found the owner of a small ship willing to take them for an unreasonably high price, of course. The boat was in surprisingly good condition, even though there were a few patches of rust and a need for a new coat of paint. The man himself was middle-aged with charcoal gray hair and a great big bushy beard that fell down to his chest. He had tattered and stained clothes with rotten teeth and repulsive breath. Though it wasn't just his breath that smelled, as he also smelled very strongly of alcohol, fish and shit, and Naruto very much doubted in the man's ability to get them across the sea in his boat. Luckily, between the money Naruto had saved over the years, and what Victor had acquired over his travels, he thought it best not to ask for details, especially when he saw the spots of blood. They were set to leave within the hour, after the boat was loaded and ready to sail. Victor had been volunteered by the old man, Naruto didn't bother to remember his name, to help load the ship. Naruto was sure if he didn't still look like a walking skeleton that could barely hold himself up he would have been forced to help too, but the old man had taken one look at him and snorted before telling him to come back within the hour. While he had been getting slowly better, it would still be a while before he looked anything but skinny. However, over the last few days since he ate those human souls, Naruto had defiantly bulked up slightly, and he hadn't been hungry for the last few days either. Walking through the village, Naruto looked around at the dirty streets, and the large number of cramped shops and stores that ran along the main high street of the village. It was a shock to Naruto the difference between Konoha and this place. The disparity in wealth between the two was obvious. Looking around, Naruto saw a market stall that grabbed his attentions. The stall was just a table with a dirty canvas roof overhead. But that was not what grabbed his attention. No, it was what the stall was selling that did. It was selling weapons. Walking up the stall, Naruto could see the suspicious and wary look in the owner's eyes as he took in his appearance, puffing on a cigarette as he did so. Not that Naruto's appearance seemed to bother the man though, as he forced a large smile on his face, the grin showing of his yellow smoke-stained teeth. Welcome to Wakaba's Weapons. We have weapons for all occasions, the finest in the land, wielded by famous shinobi and samurai alike. Raising his eyebrow at that, Naruto looked down to peruse his collection. He was not impressed. Now Naruto's was no expert in weapons. In fact, he couldn't even call himself adept, but even he could see that most of the items the man sold were no better than scrap. Of course, the stall owner didn't seem to catch Naruto's disappointment with his selection. See something you like, young master. I weapons for shinobi of all ages if that interests you. Why, even the Hokage of Konoha himself has shopped from this store. Ah, I remember it like it was yesterday. Wakaba, he said, we are on first name terms, you know. So he said, Wakaba, I have recently been trying to create a new technique. I call it the Flying Thunder God Jutsu, but I have not finished it. The man carried on in that fashion for the next few minutes, telling Naruto how he had helped Minato Namikaze perfect his signature jutsu, and how even now the man still comes to him to buy his shinobi gear. Suffice to say, Naruto was left wide-eyed at the amount of bullshit this man was sprouting. So anyway, young sir, just what kind of weapon were you looking for? Wakaba finally asked, his question knocking the dumbstruck Naruto out of his daze. Naruto began as he looked down at the poor quality weapons the man had at his stall, assessing them to the best of his ability, as he tried to find something half decent. His gaze soon fell on a hatchet, a single-handed tool which had a sharp blade on one side which looked like it was used to cut and split wood, and a hammer-like head on the other side. Looking at it, Naruto flashed back to a few days ago, when he had cut down a full-grown enemy shinobi with a similar kind of weapon. The ease at which he did it still surpassing him even now, days later. The axe he had used then had a double-headed axe blade, and had unfortunately been unfit to use afterwards, the wood handle having been broken and splintered beyond repair. Looking at the hatchet on the stall, he saw that it had a metal handle and head, with what looked like a leather grip on the shaft. Wakaba, the stall owner, upon seeing what had caught Naruto's eye, instantly jumped at the opportunity, and began his usual spiel. "Ah, good eye you have indeed, young sir. A formidable weapon that is, sir. Why, I sold one just like it the other day to another formidable shinobi. Tell me, have you ever heard of Zabuza Momochi, one of the 7 swordsmen of the mist? Why, of course you have. Well, just the other day he came in and bought the exact same weapon to replace his old one." "Aren't hatchets usually used for cutting wood?" Naruto replied blandly, looking up at the man again as he did so. Well, yes, I suppose, but the man said, taken off guard slightly by Naruto's blunt question. "I will give you 50 lien for it," Naruto said, deciding that since he was going to an active war zone it would be worthwhile have a weapon. He did still have his knife, but using a knife in combat would require a certain amount of skill that Naruto had not quite built up yet. 50 lien, Wakaba said, aghast, a look of shock on his face as he did so. "Why, a fine piece like this is easily worth 45 lien. Wait. 40 lien. Okay, you can have it," he said hurriedly as Naruto showed no signs of stopping, the greasy man gaining a scowl on his face as the masked boy did not buy into any of his spiel. "Good," Naruto said, fishing out the money from the pocket of his coat as he did. It was not much money, but it was still only slightly less than the weapon was probably worth. Picking up the hatchet from the table after giving the grumbling Wakaba his money, Naruto turned away from the stall and began heading down the street again. As Naruto continued to walk through the little village, he decided to take opportunity while he had it. Soon he found himself walking into the village's post office, the walls covered in shelves with bird nests for the messenger pigeons to rest on. This place, like seemingly the rest of the village, also stank, only it was not the smell of fish that infested this place, it was instead the acrid smell of bird feces. Each of the nests had a metal plate with the name of the place they would fly to on the front, along with the price for delivery. The letter Naruto had in one of the inside pockets of his coat had been burning a hole in it ever since he wrote it before leaving the leaf, and now that he was about to leave the land of fire it was time to send it. It was a letter to his family, though he had addressed it to Shikamaru to be careful. He didn't want one of the people working at the post office to see the Namikaze name and decided to make a little extra money by telling someone that could intercept it, and he knew that Shikamaru would know to take it to his family. The only reason he didn't leave it in his room when he left was that he needed all the time he could get to put as many miles between himself and the leaf as possible, and the time they would have spent searching the village before getting a tracking team involved had bought him even more time. But now he was far enough away he should send the letter. After all, he may not especially like his family at the moment, and he may never like them again, but he would always love them. They were his family after all, and despite the lies they had loved and cared for him, which had inspired the unconditional love many children have for their parents, and parents have for their children. It didn't mean he wasn't still pissed off and upset as he was, but he owed it to both his family and himself to explain why he left. Naruto hesitated slightly as his hand moved to the letter, nerves suddenly making his body freeze. Was he really doing the right thing? Maybe this was a mistake. But then Victor's words rang in his head again, about what he was and what people thought of people like them. He was alone, no, he was an outcast now, a scavenger of the elemental nations, and the only way for people like him to survive was to be strong and resilient. Licking his lips, Naruto let out a sigh and pulled the letter out and walked over to one of the people working. Konoha, no rush. Without another word, Naruto placed both his letter and the money on the table and turned to leave, deciding to have a look around the rest of the village before heading back to the dock. With Kushina. Kushina let out a frustrated sigh as she leaned back in her hospital bed, a fierce scowl on her face as she tried not to fidget under the gaze of the several ANBU hidden in the room for her protection. She had been confined to the room and its bed for the last 3 days, after having fainted in Naruto's room. At first she had assumed it was just the stress and the shock of realizing that Naruto might not have been kidnapped after all, but after she had woken up in the hospital the doctors had a different theory. Kushina was pregnant, about a month and a half according to the tests they had run on her while she was under their care. When Minato had told her Kushina had been a mess, as she was filled with a strange mixture of joy and sorrow, the two emotions fighting for dominance in her mind. The fact she was having another son or daughter was great news. No, it was absolutely fantastic news, and there was no way in hell she would ever think differently. Having a child with the man she loved was a blessing, and another addition to her family was a dream come true. However, her joy was dampened by the knowledge that the child growing in her even now may never get to meet their brother, who it seemed had actually run away from home. Meaning that even with the new addition to their family it would never truly be complete until Naruto came home to them. When she had told Minato her fear, her husband had gone very quiet for a moment, a look of horror flashing behind his eyes before he could completely hide it from her. He had then quietly excused himself to go and check for himself, only to return a few hours later and tell her that he came to the same conclusion. Minato was actually in a council meeting at this very moment updating the other clan heads, and she knew it would mean they would have to change the search method they had been using. It was a lot harder to find someone that didn't want to be found over someone being forced along by a group of kidnappers, even if they were just an untrained child. Naruto had already proven himself more resourceful than anyone had given him credit for by not only getting out of the village, but also somehow making it to the border before they could catch up. He had timed it perfectly, and it had them wasting time looking around the village before even getting trackers involved. This under any other circumstance would have made Kushina swell with pride, had it not been for the fact that this ingenuity of Naruto's behalf was making the process of finding him that much more difficult. But thinking on it, it still made no logical sense that the frail boy they all knew could cover such a distance in such a short amount of time, especially since he hadn't even unlocked his chakra yet. Kushina let out a sad sigh as she leaned back in her bed, her eyes slowly wandering to the form of Mito sitting in a nearby chair in the corner of the room reading a book on seals with an amount of focus that worried her. Both Mito and Urza had been taking turns to keep her company, but both had thrown themselves into their training to an almost obsessive degree since Naruto disappeared. They hadn't told them that Naruto might have run away yet, worried as they were about the reaction the news could receive from their two girls. They would tell them soon though. It would only cause more problems later down the road if they didn't. After all, wasn't this whole situation caused by lies in the first place? But for now anyway, she needed to keep calm and trust that Minato would be able to find Naruto, even if every instinct in her body was screaming at her that she should be out there searching with the rest of them. She had a baby she had to care for at the moment, and who knows the complications that could be caused by her actively engaging shinobi work would have on her unborn baby. No, she would have to trust in Minato and the others. He would be found, and everything would be okay. With Naruto. Naruto took in a deep breath of the salty air coming in off of the sea as he leaned over the side of the ship, his eyes closed as he took a moment to just feel as the waves rocked them slightly, the wind blowing gently against his masked face. They had left the port around 5 hours ago, and so far the weather seemed to be staying calm. The skies were slightly cloudy, but there did not look to be any oncoming dark clouds. Naruto still wasn't sure what the name of the middle-aged captain was, who at the present time was whistling as he steered the boat, though both he and Victor had taken to calling him captain for lack of anything better. The fact he was still drunk when they set off had worried Naruto slightly, but after the first hour the sea air seemed to have sobered him up. It would take them at least 4 days at this pace to reach the land of water, probably longer if the weather took a bad turn. Licking his lips, Naruto turned his back to the seemingly endless sea and made his way below deck to the room he was sharing with Victor. It was actually the storage room where Captain kept things that weren't regularly needed, like spare sheets and emergency food that didn't spoil. They both had their own hammock instead of beds, because apparently they were better for sleeping in on a boat. Apparently it was very easy to fall out of a bed at night when the boat was constantly rocking to and fro. Victor was off doing something. He had locked himself in the other storeroom and hadn't shown himself since. Naruto wasn't really sure he wanted to know what the older boy was doing, though based on the sounds of sawing and curses it probably wasn't anything good. Ignoring his hammock for the moment, Naruto carefully made his way to one of the crates to take a seat, using the wall to brace himself as the boat rocked on the waves. He crossed his legs and waited a moment to make sure he wouldn't be thrown off, before letting out a deep sigh and closing his eyes. It took less than a minute for the world to fade around him. Having practiced every day before he left, the leaf slipping into his mindscape had become almost easy for him. When he opened his eyes again, Naruto was once again standing on the wall that divided the dark side of his mind from the light. Turning around, he saw his inner counterpart Yu casually sitting on the side of the wall facing the darker side of his mind, his legs dangling over the edge as he occasionally kicked them out while humming a tune to himself. Without a word, Naruto moved to sit next to the other half of himself, his eyes looking out over the impure world, wandering across the dead landscape before them in curiosity. I take it they all ended up over there? None seemed the type to feel guilt for what they were doing, Naruto said, nodding in the direction of the barren landscape before him. Yeah, they weren't exactly a pleasant lot, murderers and thieves mostly, though there was one of them who was the worst of a bad lot, a murderer, a thief and a rapist. They had killed hundreds of people between them, and had kidnapped dozens of others for sick experimentation. The world is a lot better off without their kind of filth in it, Yu said as he turned his eyes to Naruto, the blonde not even blinking as he met Yu's crimson irises. Naruto was not bothered by this news. In fact, if anything, it made him feel better about eating their souls, knowing that they were scum of the earth. Anything interesting you think I should know about? I know you said you would go through the memories we managed to absorb. Did you find anything interesting like new jutsu or chakra exercises?